You are listening to Animated Indulgence, the explicit and opinionated podcast where grown men talk about cartoons. Each episode will pick apart, analyze, and dissect an animated series or movie.
Warning, there will be spoilers, even potentially for shows and movies that are not the topic at hand.
We may watch cartoons, but we don't watch our language. Discretion is advised. Welcome everybody to Animated Indulgence, where grown men watch cartoons. I am Airhammer.
I'm Deus.
And I'm Mojoric.
Today we will be focusing on the original Generation 1 Transformers from the mid-80s. And this is going to be one of our big ones. Oh boy, where do we even want to begin? There is so much to cover.
Well, first off, I think mention that we watched a condensed list of episodes from you. Hand-selected. We didn't really have the time commitment for every episode, so...
The series overall, mind you, we're sticking to the original American release, so that is seasons 1 through 4 plus the movie. There are 98 episodes, and we watched roughly 50 or so plus the movie.
I believe most of the cut episodes were from season 2, with a reasonable portion from 3 and only a couple from season 1 cut.
Yes.
Shall we begin with spoiler-free section then?
Sure. So our general idea here is that we have two warring factions of robots from the planet Cybertron. Both are trying to acquire energy, but for different reasons. The Autobots want peace, whereas the Decepticons want tyranny.
It's a show set in a relatively modern setting. It's an action drama show, and it shifts into a pulp science fiction show near the end of the run. It's got a focus on concept rather than character or narrative, which is really, really different, and one of the big points I think we'll have to talk about later on. Also, while he did mention robots, I want to clarify that the robot characters are emotional, and they're subject to irrationality, and they have personality and personal flaws. They're more or less human in metal skin.
Yes, they are fully functional AIs. They have feelings. They are, for all intents and purposes, just as human, or not human as the biological being, but human as what makes us different than, say, a gorilla or a donkey or an ant. You know, they have feelings, they have emotions, they have memories, they have attachments to other beings who have those things. They're fully functional. Which is something that I didn't really touch on my expectations when we recorded them, but I didn't really think about how actually beings they are. I always kind of thought of them that they might have been more robot-like, robots in disguise, you know?
Well, they are, but I think it's meant to make them more approachable and more understandable for a younger viewing audience. I think it works, personally. It makes them a lot more identifiable. It makes them more likable.
Yeah, for sure. Having them be actual characters rather than just automatrons is definitely a good idea. Can't grow attached to characters that have no character.
So Airhammer gave us a very brief synopsis of the premise of the show, and it goes into other things. There's a significant settlement on Earth where the Autobots crash land and reawaken, so to speak, and that is, how do I want to put this? That's the catalyst for the entire show. The early portion takes place on Earth, where the Autobots are seeking to defend it and somehow find a way to reconquer their homeland, their home planet that's been, I guess, under Decepticon rule for millions of years at this point. And the Decepticons are trying to find a way to harness enough energy to finally exterminate the Autobots and conquer all the planets that they find, including Earth. It's an old show. It's over 30 years old, and it does show its age quite a bit. It's not necessarily campy or tacky, but it does have some of that this is not modern quality.
Well, it's definitely dated. If you ever see a human character that's not a scientist or a soldier, they are very much dated in the 80s. Fashion, 80s hairstyles, 80s vehicles, 80s references to TV shows and popular culture. It's the 80s. It screams it.
That context is so important to it, because if you view it at face value, then I think by today's standards it is absolutely a bad show. I think if it just released today under the quality it's at, it would be a laughably bad show. But you also have to consider that even the animation was done differently back then. There was no computer animation, no computer coloring, no computer composite. This was all drawn by hand, composited by hand, and there was a physical human being supervising every animated sequence. It was pretty remarkable that we got such a long run.
I've noticed recently, looking through, say, YouTube videos or Facebook or various other medias, that there will be a lot of Transformers fans that regard G1 and even Beast Wars to be among their most disliked of the various Transformers series that have been out, which is mind-boggling when you consider how good they are in comparison to many of the others.
They definitely aren't as aesthetically pleasing, unless you find a certain warmth in that old style of hand-drawn cartoon. And I could definitely see that.
And on a certain level, that is going to always be taste as well. What's amazing to some people is going to be garbage to others, and vice versa. There's someone out there that is our anti-deist who absolutely loves Uncle Grandpa but despises Rupee. The anti-deist.
I will find you, and I will kill you.
And yeah, I can also look at the time you were born. You know, like the show is now 33 years old. We're looking at kids that were probably born when Beast Wars just came out, and so now they're hitting their adulthood and looking back, and they're thinking, oh my god, how is that a program? Look at its graphics. They're basing their opinion solely off the graphics.
Yes, that's deplorable, and people should give a show a shot before judging it. Like, don't bake a book off its cover, you know. You were guilty of doing the exact same thing in reverse with modern shows.
Yes.
But you can see their perspective as well.
This show is a drama, it's serious, but it's not so serious it can't laugh at itself. I think that's an important part. The tone is serious but not heavy. That's so important to consider, because for an action drama, I think we tend to think of things that are very, very strict in how they view themselves, and in this case, it is definitely willing to make a joke once in a while.
The silly and serious dynamic influences each other in the same way it does in Steven Universe. In Steven Universe, you have this serious plot, you know, people being kidnapped. Your mom might be a war criminal, all this serious stuff going on, right? And then you have the silliness of a fucking teleporting pink line.
I would say it's probably the flip side of that, where you get a lot more serious, and then once in a while, the silly just jumps out at you.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. It's a similar thing. It's not exactly one-to-one, but a similar type of scenario, right? In this one, you have a serious thing. Oh my god, Galvatron's doing this big evil plot, and it's serious, and we need to worry about it. But then Blur's there talking 100 miles per hour, and he's herding dinosaurs onto the ship, right?
It keeps it light.
Yeah. Some characters die, but there's no, like, Holocaust simulator. It's not fucking super, super dark, but it definitely has its share of drama.
As it's not very intensely narrative-driven, what can we say about how the show plays out? Because I mentioned before, it's not really a narrative show, it's not really a character show. It's something else that I can't quite pin down, but it does have character-building moments, and it does have some narrative.
There are big defining moments, which we'll obviously get to after, spoiler-free. The story is very interestingly told in a different way than a lot of shows, because in some shows you have a one frame of perspective. You are the hero, or you are, and like there's live action shows, or I'm sure there's cartoons where you're following the villain. You usually only have one perspective, and you kind of have to learn what is going on in the world through your character, right? You don't see a... Meanwhile, the Scooby Gang trying to defeat our villain that we're following, they're doing this. We don't get to see both perspectives in a lot of shows, and that kind of leads into better storytelling mechanics. You could hide stuff from the viewer, and you can surprise them. If you're giving both sides all the time, which happens a lot in this, you can't do that. The big final where they meet and fight each other is not a surprise, because you saw it happening from both perspectives. You knew that the Decepticons were going to be there to ambush the Autobots because you saw them planning it. It's not necessarily super, super bad. It's just different in that it might have been a different way of telling a story if they had not structured it in that way.
Definitely. It does kill a lot of the suspense, but at the same time, seeing the villains so frequently reinforces how villainous they are, and also gives you a good glimpse of them. It lets you connect with them.
I know why it was done. First and foremost, this show wants to sell toys. And if you could show the villains just as much as the heroes, you could sell the villain toys just as much as the hero toys. But also, I'm glad it was done in a way. Well, I wasn't necessarily upset. It was a lot more noteworthy to me at the time. But I kind of think they made the right decision, not necessarily because of the toy selling aspect, but because some of the most iconic characters, and to me anyway, are the villains, and that is a result of them getting so much screen time. So I won't necessarily say it's a bad way to structure your story, it's just different, and maybe not necessarily the best all the time.
Yeah, you had a moment of self-discovery when you realized you enjoy that suspense and the lack of knowledge of both sides.
Yeah, like, imagine if we watched Attack on Titan and we got every episode was split in half, and half the time was this perspective of all the Titans and why they're doing exactly what they're doing, and there's no mystery behind it, and when we go back to the main characters fighting them, we know exactly what's all going on already, and we know about the Titans' evil plots and where they're going to ambush them or where they're going to trick them.
That's a really good point, yeah.
It would suck, right? It wouldn't be that great of a storytelling mechanic.
Thankfully, they didn't betray any of their core concepts by structuring it that way. They knew what they were getting into. It didn't try to do anything tricky or anything suspenseful. They kept it all about the story of the day. While there is an overarching narrative to this, it's highly episodic, and it's usually today's evil Megatron plot or today's who got in trouble to this degree. You know,
and the nature of those plots change over time, which we'll talk about later when we get to one of those big points in the plot, the big story-changing plots.
Which thankfully there are. It's not limited to just this tiny little tidbit, this tiny little tidbit, this tiny little tidbit. There are some episodes that really are game changers and help you feel like the plot is advancing.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, most of the season 1 and 2 episodes will focus on attempts to retrieve energy or taking over the planet or a city or something along those lines, whereas seasons 3 and 4 are about world domination, conquering the universe, taking back Cybertron, that type of thing.
Very much, while seasons 1 and 2 are something a lot more along the lines of what I imagine G.I. Joe to be. On-Earth drama with maybe, it has science fiction elements, obviously, and fantastical, out-of-this-world, odd stuff, but it's still within a somewhat realm of possibility on Earth. And then stuff happens, and now it's Star Trek.
Season 3 is a dramatic shift in a lot of ways. It felt almost like its own sequel show. And that led to a lot of disconnect between kids as fans when we were little, but also led to a lot of really great new characters being shown. It was really a mixed bag. How did you feel about this, Mojo? Because this was your first viewing. You went into this completely blind. How did you feel about such a strange, dramatic shift in the middle of the show?
It's weird because they introduce a lot of characters that are really enjoyable, but at the same time, well, I can't really go into it.
Okay, let's move on to expectations before we blow it.
Okay.
Warning, the spoiler-free section is now over. Continue listening at your own risk.
I really don't know what to expect at all with this show. I'm hoping it's not going to be as bad for me as, like, say, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was. I tend to enjoy campy stuff like this, but I don't know, this might be outside of my range. We'll see. I've seen the movie, and it's kind of jarring, because I've never really seen anything else outside the Michael Bay movies and the barest knowledge of the franchise. So, like, there were so many characters thrown at you that I couldn't really keep up, and so yeah, I don't really think that's going to have any effect on what my baseline experience will be. I'm kind of not looking forward to doing another show that's so episodic, so I'm hoping that won't taint my viewing of it as well. Expectations of the show itself, I expect it to be old. I expect to feel the age of the show. I expect it to feel very dated. And maybe I'll get into that, maybe I won't. We'll see. I expect there to be lots and lots and lots of characters. I already know there's going to be lots of characters. I know a lot of these characters are going to be one or two off things made exclusively to sell toys and then never show up again, just so they have an excuse to have that character on a toy line. So yeah, it's going to be one of the very first shows we watch that is pretty much made exclusively to market toys, so that should be interesting.
I didn't know what to expect because I've only seen a few episodes at a time since I was little. I've never sat down and watched a huge, extensive amount of Transformers at once. I don't even think when I was little I watched this much Transformers in such a short amount of time. I usually watch one episode a day, 5 days a week. Honestly, it held up better than I thought. It shows its age quite a bit, but I didn't feel like it was corny or campy, and I'd consider that a success.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what I said in my expectations, but I know I definitely have better feelings of the show than I anticipated I was going to. I was really kind of worried somewhat that I really wasn't going to be able to get into it, and it was going to be maybe not along the same line of the torture that you had with Yu-Gi-Oh!, but I wouldn't just be able to enjoy it. I really wanted to be able to enjoy it on at least some level, because I know you guys both feel real passionately about it. I'm glad that I at least came away with something. I didn't hate the experience of watching it, so.
I could tell it took you a few episodes for it to start clicking and start realizing what you were watching.
Yeah, for sure.
On my end, I put a lot of effort into watching it without nostalgia glasses. I can't say I had a complete success, but I put a lot of thought into how things were put together, how things were presented, and how I felt about them coming back, watching, and as sterile of a situation as I can, knowing that I'm a lifelong fan of the franchise. So I will try to be as objective as possible for the podcast.
Fair enough.
I've been a Transformers fan now for 30 years. This show came out when I was just a little over a year old. I guess I started watching it around the time the movie came out, and my very first figure was Ultra Magnus that I got for my 3rd birthday, and it just ballooned from there. I wouldn't say that I really stepped up my game until probably around the time Beast Machines came out, or Robots in Disguise. That's when my collection really took off. And then, of course, today I'm still working on my various digibashes that you can see on DeviantArt that I've been working on now for 11 years. The show's just had a huge impact. G1 in particular, yes, it's incredibly dated, but I'd say it's still among my top 3 of the overall series.
Shall we move on to characters then?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so characters. This is where the podcast will get a little nuts because there's so many characters.
Yeah, there's so many.
Yeah.
I'm notoriously bad for remembering character names. And I think, Deis, you've pointed out a couple times that you're surprised by how many I remember. Because how long have we known each other, Deis?
Yeah, what, 2-3 years?
Yeah, and I'm notoriously bad at remembering character names, and you even commented on it in Attack on Titan. And I did an exercise of my own to list as many characters as I could before I was falling asleep. I was actually pretty surprised with myself. Listed out a collection of characters, and I was actually really surprised by how many characters I remembered. And then I thought about it, and I don't think it's really as surprising as I first thought. There's so many. Of course I'm going to remember some. You throw 1,000 names at my face, I'm going to remember at least fucking 30 of them.
It's pretty much that, yeah. Season 1 alone gives us 44 Transformers and 3 humans.
To be able to have them be memorable, to have them stick out in any way other than just a name thrown at you, a face, a couple lines, and them still be memorable, them still stick with you in any way, does show in how the characters were built, how they were made. You have a lot of single names that are very active, very energetic. You have names like Mirage, Jazz, Thundercracker. Those will stick with you. They're very catchy names.
They're really good at making iconic names that are simple, either one word or a combination of 2-word names, and so that's how they get you there. But they also, all the characters, especially the one-off characters, if they get you to stick in your mind, it's because they have a gimmick. Blur, he's not necessarily a one-off, but he's not a massively major character, but his gimmick, he talks real fast, right? Cup always has stories. The tank guy's always, yelling Kablowie, or whatever the fuck, His gimmick. They all have their gimmick. That's how they get you. They want something that catches your mind, and now you know the iconic thing about them, so you know which one you want when you want to go get your toy, or when you want to quote them or reference them to your friends. And away we go. They all have their catchphrase. They all have their little thing.
I would say that's good design. That was all.
It is good design. If you're gonna have a billion characters, that's the way to go about it. I think it's cool and it's interesting, and it's definitely the goal of this show. It's a little sad that we get a lot of characters like that instead of fewer really, really developed, fleshed out characters. But if you're gonna have a trade-off, at least you get something fun and silly out of it.
Actually, that's a good point. It's got a huge cast, But the core cast, the ones that show up time and time again, is rather small. And I feel like there's also a secondary cast of Autobots that show up fairly frequently, and then these tertiary characters that have 1, 2, 3 appearances and they're gone. I think
Cosmos.
they did the best job. Yeah, poor Cosmos.
He came out of nowhere and he disappeared into nowhere.
I would say as season 2 picks up, some of these characters start to become a little more background. For season 2, Skids would probably be the number 1 on that list, as he only makes like 2 appearances. Cosmos, I think, has more screen time than that.
He was just the one that was off the top of my head.
And then season 3, while they do kill off like 3/4 of the previous characters and introduce another 50 or more, there are some that actually make maybe 1 or 2 appearances. They may not even have a speaking line, and then you never see them again. The very first episode, More Than Meets the Eye, is a 3-parter little mini-series to get you going. And in this one, we have 18 Autobots versus like 10 Decepticons at the start. And to pad it out, they decided, okay, we're just going to make a whole lot more Seekers, Reflector members, and we're going to duplicate Rumble over and over again just to pad out the Decepticon rank. So while you're watching this, you're going to see a lot of duplicates of various colors just showing up. A handful have actually managed to get into the toy line and the lore over the last 30 years. So it's interesting how they've developed these nobodies.
I'd like to point out at this point that you mentioned the toy line, that these characters, first and foremost, before they are ever a character in the cartoon, they are a physical, actual, real-life toy that they made, created, molded. This might be obvious, and it probably is to 99% of the people listening, but the Transformer characters, Optimus Prime was a toy first before he was the character you know and love if you've watched the show. That's really interesting. I can't think of... I don't know any other show that I have watched that is merchandise first, character design later. And
I've got a story for you when we move on to plot and theme about that, because that has an interesting story behind it.
He-Man, I think, was the one to be given that treatment, in that it started out as a toy line, then a comic, and then finally a cartoon.
Huh.
In this case, Transformers is part of the really big robot boom from the 1982 to 1984 era. September 1984 was huge when it comes to transforming robots. We have Challenge of the GoBots that debuted September 8th, Voltron on September 10th, and Transformers on September 17th. Like, that's a lot right there in the span of about a week and a half.
Yeah, that is a lot of robot media for people to consume. Oh, we got a lot of robot shows, I guess. That's what we're watching. It's really interesting how, for the most part, like, the characters transform in a exaggerated way, but they could actually do that in a real world. Not in the same way that they are in the cartoon, but they could actually transform. There is a figure of that character transforming into that thing that he transformed into. That's neat. It's really neat that you get a toy that can actually live up to what it does in the show. Unlike
the toys you see of guys swinging swords and guys firing guns, guys jumping off cliffs, this robot can actually turn into that truck.
Exactly. That guy with the gun, that gun looks like a gun, but it's just a piece of plastic. And sure, the Transformers have those too, but the Transformer actually still does something. You literally transform him. That is an action you do. That is like just as important to what the Transformer is as the fact that you build with Legos. Legos are cool and fun in of themselves, but if they didn't connect, who the fuck cares, right? At that point, they're just blocked.
That's a very good point. And I think that does tie into the characters, because the characters, as we see them on screen, are always very active individuals. I don't think any of them are very sedentary. I don't think many of them are very reactive. A lot of them are very, very proactive characters. And when we get to see them over and over again, it builds in a very interesting way. I think the character development itself is something that I would like to talk about.
When we first started watching Transformers, you told me, you're like, I don't think the show's going to be nearly as much as a commercial as you think it is what you said. And I think in a way you were right, but also in a way it is just as much a commercial as I thought it was going to be, but done really well. Like I said, the toys live up to the things, right? So like I think it was just as much a commercial as I thought it was going to be. It's just hidden.
Well, shifting back to the characters, can we all agree that there are too many tertiary characters that only show up for a couple episodes?
Yes.
Yeah.
The show in itself would be better if they were cut, but like I said, the function of the show itself is to sell toys, and if they're not selling toys, the show itself wouldn't have continued to exist, and so therefore they needed to kind of be there.
So
Anyway.
we do get an idea of who some of these characters are, but we don't get a big spotlight on them at any one point. It's built up through small interactions. Lots and lots of small interactions.
Some characters do kind of like have a centric episode to themselves, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Starscream
for
gets the
instance-
most of those, I think.
Yeah, probably. Soundwave's a good example, actually. The other big Decepticon who doesn't really get many episodes of himself and rarely gets the spotlight shed on him. We know who Soundwave is. He shows up frequently enough in the background. He has speaking roles. He talks to Megatron and Starscream frequently. But he never gets anything talking about him. To get this idea of who he is based on those little interactions is really odd, but well done character building. It's remarkably consistent for as inconsistent as the rest of the show is.
It makes him a good character, a consistent character, but maybe not a really interesting character. He doesn't have a, as far as we know, really sordid backstory or...
Yeah.
Some of the most interesting characters are... what's his name? I just fucking have him on my list. Skyfire. Starscream's buddy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. He woke up and they tried to get him to be a Decepticon. He's like, well, no, fuck this. Like, this isn't me. He's probably one of the most interesting characters to me in the entire show. And he's not a very big, important one, but he's probably one of the most interesting ones to me. He's not super cool to look at, character design-wise, but as a character outside of his art, interesting little plot point there.
And that, I think, is what the character building in this show is all about. It gives you a glimpse enough at all the characters so you can pick a favorite. I don't know why it does that, but it definitely spends time doing that. If you watch the show, you will have enough of a snapshot of each character to know which ones you like and which ones you can't stand. They are all characterized very well, even if it's slowly, even if it's only 2 episodes. You know the characters by the time they're done showing you them, and sometimes it leaves you wanting more. In fact, most of the time it leaves you wanting more.
So, do you want to go into... I know we can't do it for all the characters, or even a good chunk of them, but say in the other podcast we went over a small recap of what some of the characters are. Do you want to do that for some of the more major ones? Say Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Jazz...
Yeah, we can do that.
Megatron, Galvatron...
Yeah, we can probably...
Obviously Starscream.
Yeah, there's a few characters that really stand out through their frequent appearances.
We can start with the big one, the most obvious, Optimus Prime.
Yeah, Optimus Prime is the only character I have any actual notes written about. He is the responsible adult that any child could always look up to. He is decisive, direct, he takes understandable actions when faced with a problem. He never worries. He is built to be a hero. And you know what? Normally, that is super obnoxious. Normally, I hate those guys. They did it so well with Optimus Prime. I love this guy. You can't help but admire him.
Yeah, Optimus Prime is... I'll have to come back up with a list of my favorite characters, but Optimus Prime would probably be up there. He is the most fleshed out character in the show. Hands down. He is pure good. He always wants what's best for the people around him, the people he decides he cares about, which is the Autobots and the humans he takes under his wing. And he's just all around a good guy.
For me, Optimus Prime is probably Superman done right. If I wanted to make it very short.
He's Superman with weakness. He's Superman with a weakness other than just a shitty rock, right? Like he has other people he cares about. Like Superman obviously cares about people too, but like a lot of times he just has his one damsel or whatever, right? Optimus Prime cares about all of Earth. He's a defender. He really is. The Autobots, in a way, become the Crystal Gems on Earth in season 1 and 2, right?
Definitely.
The Decepticons trying to take advantage of Earth's resources and take their power and use Earth for their own, but the Autobots try to protect them. That's the straight up fucking Crystal Gems.
Yeah, and that's something I think we'll get into more heavily in inspirations and influences.
For sure.
I see him as kind of a father figure, which I think is what made it so devastating when he was killed off in the movie. It's like the number one character of the entire show is gone, and it just ripped so many kids' hearts apart that it led to all that fan mail that brought him back for the end of season 3.
Yeah, you have to admit, though, like, people were upset. People were, like, devastated. But, man, did it do its job. Like, when you kill off an iconic character, man, that gets attention. When Mary Jane died in Spider-Man, shit got real. Like, people were like, oh my fucking god. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you kill off people that people have grown to love, it does its job. And if you do it tactfully and you do it right, which the movie is probably the best piece of media we watched, definitely the highest quality production value. And when they kill off Optimus Prime, it's done tactfully, it's done well. It's not. I know why people got upset, but I think it was a good move.
Out of all the characters, he's pretty much the only one to get a true backstory. We learn that about 4 million plus years prior to the events of the show, that he was originally a more gentle, smaller robot called Orion Pax. His job was to have, like, he ran a shipyard. Energy would come in and he would process it and send it out. He had a girlfriend named Ariel. His best friend was Dion. And he just lived a peaceful life until the Decepticons decided to attack. And it was a result of Alpha Trion that he became Optimus Prime and eventually led the Autobots.
Alpha Trion is also another one of those side characters that has, like, a lot of... He's actually one of the side characters that has the most oomph. Like, the most backing him up, the most side plot, the most background,
Yeah.
Continuity. He shows up everywhere. They're time traveled all over the place. And he's like, oh, Alpha Trion's there. There's Alpha Trion. Did you remember that time when we were talking to Alpha Trion?
Yeah, he's got a lot of importance in the background. Yeah, especially in the backstory, the resistance and the beginning of the war.
Yeah, the farthest they go back is 9 million years when he was just known as A3. This was before they got the Quintessons off Cybertron, and back then he was just as rude and brash as, say, Hot Rod when we first see him.
Who would you guys say are the other core Autobots? I think there's some room to debate this.
There's Bumblebee. He's not really super shown, but he's also one of the ones that became super iconic in the franchise as a whole. So he's always visible to me, at least, if he's not super iconic.
Did you like Bumblebee's presentation in the original show?
Yeah, it's okay. I wouldn't say he's one of the most right-home characters, but he's there. What do you guys think of him, though? I'm curious what your guys' opinions on some of the characters are.
Well, back then he just seemed like any other Autobot. Of course, they fleshed him out and turned him into more of a leader in today's standards. But back then he was just the robot that hung out with the human.
I think I know what it is that makes him stand out to me. He is one of the very few cars that I can identify. There's something I want to note, that all the or for the most part, as far as I'm aware, all the cars that the Transformers can turn into are based on, or at least loosely, on real-world cars, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a car person. I work at a gas station, and it's weird that I know so little about cars. I don't even drive. But, like, the only two, like, fucking types of cars I could tell you, like, oh, that's a van. That's not a car. It's a van. That's a truck. That's a PT Cruiser. That's a Volkswagen Bug. That's the one here. Bumblebee's a Volkswagen Bug. And then, other than that, everything else falls into car.
Out of all the characters, Bumblebee I think stood out the most to me vehicle-wise, because when I was a kid,
exactly.
Like you're saying, like I would see Volkswagen Beetles all over the place, and I would always think of Bumblebee. I never saw any of the other vehicles.
Exactly, and that's what I was saying earlier when I first brought up Bumblebee. He catches my eye because he's the Bug. He's the only car I know. I know the other ones are probably there's some Ferraris in there. There's some random Ford car, the Ford number 42. You know what I mean. Like car people love their cars. I'm sure they are just as nerdy, as enthusiastic, and in love with their nerdy car world as I am with fucking Steven Universe, Magic the Gathering, and fucking Mega Man, right? And I'm sure they're into it. I just don't get it. I can't enjoy it, so Bumblebee's the only car, when he's transformed, that is recognizable to me outside of Optimus Prime.
I was that kid. I loved Bumblebee when I was little. He was awesome. Bumblebee was a very likable character for me because he was very approachable. He was a defender in a lot of ways. And not in the grand scale, but in a very small, real, intimate scale. He went out and literally covered the humans when they were fired upon, and that made him
one-on-one. It was kind of implied that he was one-on-one friends with a lot of them, right?
Yes. And there are a lot of Autobots that connected with human culture, but Bumblebee was the one that stood out as connecting with individual humans.
Yeah, that's neat.
Well, that and being pretty much human size in robot form kind of helped out with everything.
Yeah, there's that too. He's really small compared to everyone else. And that's one thing that this show does really weird is fuck ups aside. Even if the show is perfect in its like scaling, that is a weird character design thing. Not a lot of shows do that. Have characters that are so drastically scaled different.
I definitely want to talk about the scale differently later.
Yeah,
like not a lot of shows that I'm familiar with. Anyway, I'm sure you guys are into it. Like you guys know, you guys watch a lot of fucking giant robot Sentai stuff, and
we'll get more into that with the art. But yeah, we call it mass shifting, and it varies from episode to episode. You'll have some episodes where Optimus Prime is so large that a human would fit in the palm of his hand, for example. And then in the next episode, the human will go up to his kneecap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that was an issue in the original show. But for the most part, they were consistent in their size. I think if you see a lineup in one episode, the lineup's going to be mostly the same in this next episode where you see them at the same heights comparatively. Which I'm thankful for, because, man, some of those scenes make it weird. I think the other big Autobot for me that stood out, especially considering his inclusion in Season 3 after the shift in casting, was Grimlock.
But, yeah, I knew you were going to say him.
Oh, yeah, no, because he is. It's true. There's no denying it. Grimlock was a big character.
A massive one. The only other one that I would have been content with you putting there is, at least for me, Rick Gar. I really like Rick Gar as well. I mean, he's not nearly as big as Grimlock, but...
Yeah, for me in Season 1, I guess outside of Optimus and Bumblebee and Grimlock that stood out were Jazz, Ironhide, maybe Ratchet, and Wheeljack. And unfortunately, they all get killed off in the movie. With the exception of Jazz, but sadly, Scatman Crothers died around the time the movie came out, and so even though they had the character survive the film with the actor gone, they decided to make Jazz a background character that appeared maybe 2 or 3 times, and he never had another speaking line again, sadly.
So Grimlock is strong, brash, arrogant, stupid,
King of Dinobots.
Absolutely lovable because of it. He takes all these annoying negative traits and makes himself likable because of them.
Yeah, I know there's the trope I'm thinking off the top of my head, but like he's a lovable fool type character. He's dumb and you love him for it. Like his slapstick comedy dumbness is the silliness of the day and you smile for it. It doesn't rub it in your face too often, and when it happens, it's enjoyable.
It's very rare you see a comedy relief character also be a massive badass in combat, but Grimlock pulls it off.
The one thing I have to say about the Dinobots is they're only really Transformers in spirit, aren't they? They're never in their non-dino form.
I know, right? It's weird.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah, after Season 2, they just stop. After the movie?
Yeah.
You almost forget that he's dinosaur. He's a Transformer at times.
I'm curious if it has to do with their brains and the way that they were developed, that they prefer to be dinosaurs more than robots.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
But it was definitely disappointing for me that they stayed in their dinosaur forms more often, because I really did like their robot modes quite a bit.
The dinosaur ones are great, but you're Transformers. Come on, you're not single stationary MERS. It's stupid. It bugged me. Grimlock's great though. Also, his plots are just out of this world bizarre, even for this show. A show about giant robots, they're bizarre. There's one episode
even his creation.
Yeah, let's make a dinosaur bot. Let's not. Why not? Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's play God.
His introduction was Wheeljack decides to play God, and it works. There are no negative repercussions for Wheeljack playing God and creating life.
And then and he's like, let's do it again 4 more times.
It had repercussions at first. They destroyed the base.
No long-term repercussions.
Yeah. They busted down a wall inside their base and they found a bunch of dinosaur bones. So Spike takes them to the museum. Hound creates a hologram to represent what they would have looked like. And Wheeljack's like, hey, let's go make dinosaurs.
It's literally that. It's just like...
I want to talk about Wheeljack briefly because you mentioned it here.
Yeah.
As a kid, I never really cared about him. He was just a character with a cool face whose ears lit up instead of having a mouth. Having watched the show again as an adult, I adore Wheeljack as a character. He really stood out to me as one of the secondary characters with a lot of oomph behind him. He is absolutely a mad scientist, but I love him. He's so fun to watch on screen.
I would say that Wheeljack was probably the second death of the film that bothered me the most as a kid, and probably still to this day. Like, I can kind of understand where they were going with it. They wanted to axe off certain toys because they weren't on the shelves, and at the same time, at least they had developed backup characters that kind of fit the same role, but it was still bad in my view. I can remember how, reading back to some of the earlier drafts of the script, originally it was supposed to be Smokescreen that died instead of Wheeljack, so he would have lived on, but sadly they changed their mind in the end, and he bit the dust.
Rip Wheeljack.
Of course, he does make a reappearance in Japan, but only because they didn't get the movie until 1989 and didn't have a clue that he was dead. We'll get into that later.
It's a zombie or something. We already have transforming ghosts. Why not transforming zombies?
I'm pretty sure they had transforming zombies in 2 episodes.
Yeah.
They did.
Fair enough.
What about Decepticons?
Yeah, Decepticons. I guess we'll start with Megatron, the big bad, obviously.
Megatron / Galvatron. Yeah.
So Megatron was just a random creation sometime during the war, long before Optimus made the scene. In fact, it was Megatron's actions that led to Optimus being created. So he made his own worst enemy, so to speak. He took control of the Decepticon forces. At first, it was kind of like he was just behind the scenes. Nothing had really started. He was taking on Autobots in secret. He was building up an army, and no one saw it coming. We have no idea what most of the Transformers turned into on Cybertron, so for all we know, Megatron was some kind of a tank. Who knows? Here he turns into a Walther P-37 or 38 handgun. The toy, which has had a number of changes over the years, even came with sniper extensions, and yeah, it was pretty neat. Of course, today, if you ever do see the toy on shelves, it has an orange cap, and all other iterations of the character have been anything other than a gun.
There are gun laws in the United States about selling toy guns, so
yeah.
they had to change it.
I always thought it was weird that it was a gun in the first place. How kind of weird is it that, like, I'm so powerful that I have to turn into a tool that someone else has to use to do my bidding?
Oh, no, it's perfect. It is absolutely perfect because he is an instrument of death.
Yeah.
And nothing else exemplifies
that.
war like a gun.
I get that, but why not like a cannon that you could fire yourself? Like, why does he have to? If no one else is around to hold him, he turns into a gun and just falls on the ground?
Sort of. Like, we've seen him shoot while hovering, but I guess to get more accuracy, another Decepticon would hold him. Looking back to the toy line, it was the Micro Change subline from Takara. They had 4 different toy guns that all transformed, and they wound up selecting that particular mold. What led to him becoming the leader of the Decepticons, we won't know. Was there a different choice before him? We don't know. There was also Toyco. They had a toy called the Astro Magnum, which eventually became Shockwave, who we didn't really get to see much of in the show, and he turned into a pretty nice, cool-looking laser gun.
If you showed me a lineup of toy robots and told me to pick the bad guy leader, the one that turned into the handgun would probably be my pick. It's just such a fitting portrayal.
Yeah, I get your argument that it's like a very, like, it's a powerful thing. It's a very powerful image. A gun is a very powerful tool. But at the same time, it's a tool. Megatron is supposed to be the person pulling the trigger of the gun. The person, like, I get it. It's just a weird metaphor. I can see it in both ways. Anyway, that's a weird tangent.
As a character, Megatron is a tyrant. He is ruthless. He is portrayed as surprisingly competent given his 80s cartoon villain.
Yeah. He's as competent as a 80s cartoon villain can be.
Yeah, he's on the upper scale of that limitation.
Yeah. There's some rule of the universe where, like, in the 80s, in that era, you're not allowed to actually be fully capable.
There are some in his forces that are just kind of along for the ride, and then others that are like blind followers. They will go to the ends of the universe for him. Those two mostly being Soundwave and Shockwave.
There's a few. Is it Thundercracker or his little sidekick, Skywarp? That little guy.
Yeah,
that hangs out
Skywarp.
with him. Surprised I didn't have that on my list. Anyway, it's one of those two that are kind of like on the fence about whether or not they actually want to be a Decepticon.
Thundercracker is, yeah.
Thundercracker. I do like Thundercracker, not necessarily because he's the most iconic and memorable character, because he doesn't really get that much airtime. He's a blue jet. I like blue. I like jets. It's simple as that sometimes when you pick a favorite, right?
Yeah. And he's very compelling. Being a Decepticon who's not really sold on the cause makes him interesting.
Definitely, for sure. They don't really explore all that much that I remember. Or maybe we didn't get to see that many of his episodes.
We don't really get too much depth into most of the Decepticons to see why they follow Megatron or even why they're Decepticons in the first place. We eventually get something with Blitzwing, but this is promptly ignored and transferred over to another Decepticon altogether, but handled a little differently.
You want to talk about Megatron's transformation?
I think he's talking about Galvatron.
Okay. So yeah, they went with a very strong decision here among all the characters that they changed, and whereas the Autobots are just flat out killed off in the movie, they thought, okay, we're going to introduce this character that can literally reformat you into another being altogether. So we have Unicron, played by Orson Welles, that decides, okay, we have these Decepticons that have just been flung out into space, they're heading my way, and I can have some disciples of my own to go do my bidding. So he reformats Megatron, at first, trying to barter with him and even wants to kill him because he won't follow his orders. So he's turned into Galvatron, who is just as ruthless and conniving as Megatron, at least at the start. In the film, he's voiced by Leonard Nimoy, and the character I felt was amazing there.
He gets a point on the character as awesome scale solely for being voiced by Leonard Nimoy in my book, in the movie. Even if it was just for the movie, I'm a fanboy. But yeah, it's an interesting transformation. Like, they explore it somewhat in some of the episodes where what it means for him to be a different character or a different person. Wasn't there an episode where the Decepticons took him to a shrink, essentially?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, they explore it well.
It's kind of a pity. Following the movie, Galvatron is flung off to the planet Throw, where he lands in a plasma bath, and he sits there for, well, I want to say several months, up to almost a year, before the Decepticons finally find him and pull him out. And at this point, we have a completely different character than what we saw in the film. Leonard Nimoy, of course, continued on with Star Trek or whatever he was doing at the time.
Everything.
And everything. And Frank Welker, who voiced Megatron, now returned, changed up the voice, and gave us Galvatron. But this character was much different from the film. Now he was mad. He was insane. He wanted to attack his own followers more than, think up a crazy plot.
He became less of a competent evil villain, like, say, the Joker, and became more like a evil, ruthless, evil for the sake of being evil and doesn't care about his minions anymore villain, more like Voldemort from Harry Potter.
Yeah, it's like, you get one little thing out of line and I'm going to shoot you. That's the way.
Exactly.
The episode in question that you brought up was Web World, where he just got so chaotic that they finally broke down and they took him to this planet where, it's basically a mental hospital, and ultimately they never fixed him.
Yeah. What happened was Galvatron drove the planet itself insane, then killed the planet's brain.
Yeah.
Galvatron.
That's how mad he is.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird because when Japan took over, they pretty much eliminated all of this aspect from the character. In fact, I would have to say post-Web World, Galvatron isn't as crazy. Looking at the Return of Optimus Prime, when the first Decepticons that he brought to the lab get infected, and Rodimus is like, they're all infected, and it's a Magnus plague, and Galvatron's, they've all gone crazy, this is no place for me, and he flies off. One of the best lines of the series, I'd have to say.
I love how the little things about Galvatron help you get a better idea of the big picture of him. He's insane probably because Unicron had a mind link with him and died while that mind link was active. He's hesitant to be anywhere near the hate plague because he's been controlled before and wants nothing to do with losing control again.
I also think Galvatron is the much more interesting half of the Galvatron-Megatron character. But Megatron is the much more iconic character. Like,
I think they're both fascinating. They're both fascinating in their way.
Yeah, I guess. Galvatron, for me, is a much more interesting character, but Megatron is the character that I will always think of when I think, oh, who's the bad guy in Transformers? Oh, it's Megatron and Starscream.
That's a pretty good transition into talking about Starscream. Holy crap, iconic.
Yes, he is the iconic backstabbing side villain, not quite second command, but like higher in the ranks, but totally not loyal. And he's great. It's probably the most highlight character in the entire show for me now. When I sit down and think about it, Starscream is probably one of my absolute favorites in the show.
We get a little bit of a backstory for him, just briefly, in that before the war, or which war do I want to say it is? The Third War. Before the Third War began, he was just a scientist on Cybertron. Skyfire at the time was his partner, and, they just did research and such. There is no explanation as to what happened with Starscream after he lost Skyfire on Earth. So we have absolutely no idea why he is the way he is. Why is he a Decepticon? Why does he follow Megatron? We know in the end that he's trying to just overthrow Megatron and get command.
It's great, isn't it? The thing is, you're upset about this, right? You're upset about this. There's this big mystery. And I think it's great because that is something right there. Just make that a show, right? Make fucking, Walter White's descent into madness and fucking Breaking Bad, but with Starscream starting from a fucking doctor, scientist guy, turning into like the guy that's trying to overthrow Megatron every 2 minutes. I want to see that.
That would be a cool comic series.
Yeah, or something. Like, I want to see a story arc of that. That'd be interesting. But yeah, Starscream's amazing. He is a trope. There is a trope named after him. The Starscream. That's how iconic he is. He's the weaselly, conspiring sidekick to the major villain. He's there because he has talents, but goddamn, you can't trust him.
Most of his incarnations are roughly the same.
And his voice, man. The voice.
Oh, yeah. The voice.
We'll definitely get into voice acting later. Starscream's a good one.
What else is there to say about him, though?
There are other characters who did the trope just as well, but I don't think any of them did it with such style and gusto. Nobody can really put their fingerprint on that trope the way Starscream does. So, Mojo, you said earlier that Soundwave wasn't really compelling to you. To me, he's intensely compelling for the same reason that Starscream is. Why is he a Decepticon? Unlike Starscream, who we obviously, know wants to be leader, Soundwave wants nothing other than to follow Megatron. Whatever Megatron is selling, he bought into hard. He is willing to do terrible, horrible things.
I agree. Maybe tie his plot would be linked to. They both serve under Megatron. I'm telling you, it's a good series leading up to like the era between when the Transformers first became, not Transformers, the Decepticons first became Decepticons, and Megatron was recruiting people to when they got stranded on Earth. Boom. Big blank that needs to be filled in for a lot of characters.
There's one particular episode that I don't think we put into our rotation. It's called The Secret of Omega Supreme, and it focuses on how Megatron did manage to get some of his followers, and that he forced them through a device he had created called the Auto Smasher. We don't exactly know how it works. It's just that he would find Autobots or neutral Cybertronians around the planet. He would get them preoccupied until the Auto Smasher got into contact and then reprogram them to make them follow him.
Huh.
And that is how the Constructicons became Decepticons, because before then they were simply builders. They had no allegiance. So you have to wonder how many other robots did he use this thing on before.
He's just basically going around kidnapping people and brainwashing them.
Yeah.
People do that shit in real life. Fucking kidnap kids, like fucking brainwash them the whole life. Now they're soldiers.
But you have to think, was Soundwave one of his victims, or does Soundwave really believe in his cause?
Yeah, like I said, that whole gap needs to be filled in. I think if they did a show that filling in that gap and they did it like an actual proper like narrative, it could be interesting and fun.
Definitely. Are there any other characters that stand out to you guys?
Dead End. I like Dead End. He's funny.
Okay.
There's a lot of characters I don't really feel the need or even have a lot to say about, like as in-depth characters. I like their gimmick as I talked about earlier. Dead End is one of them. Wreck-Gar is another one. Cup. I really enjoy Cup's little like, I'm an old-timey guy that has a story for that, and I fucking absolutely adore his callbacks to Bones from Star Trek.
That's Wreck-Gar.
Oh, yeah, Wreck-Gar. Yeah, you're right. But you know what I mean.
Actually, that's a good point. The cast for season 3 is a lot more nuclear than the season 1 cast. There's only about a dozen or so core Autobots and a lot of tiny little cameos that don't even have speaking lines anymore.
Yeah, they introduced like 29 or more Autobots in season 3, and we get about another 20 or more Decepticons, and only a handful are really focused on, unlike the seasons 1 and 2 cast.
Yeah, you still get a couple that are just kind of there, though. There's a few that are kind of... There's at least one that fit into like a new category that are really still not fleshed out, but they're just still there. RC, the girl robot, she's just there a lot of the time. And she's just the staple. Like, we gotta have a girl robot. We've established that they exist. We gotta have one.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the 80s, and the girl is a personality as far as 80s standards go.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad that they didn't flesh out RC a bit more, especially in her debut. It was a season 2 episode, The Search for Alpha Trion, where we are first introduced to female Autobots. However, out of the 6 that are shown, RC unfortunately isn't one of them. It's like this would have been the best chance in the series.
And at least those female Autobots had something going on, like a plot.
Yeah, 4 out of the 6 had speaking lines for that episode, but this is their only appearance in the entire series.
Yeah, I know, but they had plot. They had a goal. They had stuff they were doing. They didn't just... RC just is like there to be tagged along. She just kind of exists in the same world as they do.
Yeah, I feel it would have been better if RC had been among their group in that episode rather than simply appear in the movie and she's the only female Autobot we ever see again.
If we're talking about it would have been better, I could be here for hours.
Also, while on the topic of RC, is that her name actually the letter R, the letter C?
ARCEE.
Okay, I just never looked to see how it was spelled out. I was just curious.
Yeah, it's spelled out, but it's pronounced RC, like the remote control.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fair enough.
Also, she was one of 2 characters of the series that never received a toy in the 80s.
There's more than 2. There was all the female Autobots.
That's really surprising to me. That is absolutely really surprising to me, because I thought that would be her purpose. Oh, we have to have the girl robot to have the girl toy.
Well, not until 2015.
That is really surprising to me.
Out of all the core characters, she was one of 2. All the female Autobots, none of them ever received toys back then. Same with Alpha Trion. Unicron had a template, he had a prototype, but they never mass-produced him due to technical issues.
Due to it looking really ugly.
That too, yeah. He was going to be all yellow and blue, and the toy
fat.
And fat, yeah, it looked like it was going to suck. The Quintessons didn't have toys. A lot of Season 3 characters that were kind of in the background didn't have toys. Like Wreck-Gar was the only Junkion toy, even though we saw so many other ones.
You have to admit that, like, toys of any of those alien creatures would have been immensely subpar and lame toys compared to the Transformers.
True.
To be fair, a couple of the Transformers were subpar and lame at that point.
Oh, for sure. But, like, at least they transformed. Like, if you have, like, a little weird tentacle creature alien, he's a tentacle creature alien. That's what he does. I mean, that's cool and interesting for any other action figure, because that's what all an action figure does most of the time. He's there with a couple points of articulation. But, like, for being as a part of the same line as a Transformer, that doesn't really stand up. That's probably,
As for other characters we could talk about, I guess the Constructicons as a whole, because Devastator, to me, was such an iconic combiner for the series.
Combiners in general we should talk about. We made the problem of really... when we did the Steven Universe episode, we kind of accidentally skipped over what fusion is or something. We had to go back and...
Out of the initial toy lines that they took the characters from, there were 2 different teams, but they only utilized one, which were the construction vehicles. The other one was a set of trains. Those trains eventually became Autobots for Japan's Headmaster series, but they never came to the US. Instead, we had the 6 construction vehicles that were turned into these green and purple warriors for the Decepticon forces, and they turn into the massive titan that is Devastator.
I'd like to point out the Constructicons fit that other main boy toy staple, man. You have the only thing that, like, Transformers doesn't cover for, like, main boy stereotype toys is generic human soldier toys. And for that, you had G.I. Joe, right? Which were made by the same company, probably. And so they're not going to compete against themselves. But for Transformers, you have robots, you have cars, you have, like, weapons, you have it all. Like, you have all the main boy toy staples.
Yeah, that's a good point. It was all that rolled into one, and you add character on top of that.
Yeah. And they're all from a show that you could watch and you could see. It's almost, I don't want to say sad, because that sounds like quite the right word, but a supplemental to the toy. Like, this show is the supplemental media to the toy line, right? Like, when you were a kid and you bought a toy and it didn't have a TV show, you had to imagine this character's backstory or get the little bit on the back of the card or the back of the cardboard about what the fuck it is. You don't know if the toy's just a generic character. You're a kid, you're sitting around playing around a sandbox. They had personality. You watch them on TV. They're the same character.
Yeah, Hasbro even went the extra distance of giving every toy tech specs, and there was a 3D gimmick on their bio cards.
Yeah.
Oh god, they had so much content back then.
And Devastator as a character, he is used as a wrecking ball. He is the ultimate weapon that the Decepticons unleash when they are ready for combat. Always very powerful.
Yeah, they're like super weapon.
Thinking back to what we said about mass shifting again, Devastator's height and even look changed wildly by episode. I think one episode that we had on our list was the Master Builders, and this one was always laughable to me. In the episode, the Constructicons convinced Grapple to make this energy platform that he had created a model of, and toward the end of the episode, when the Autobots are circling this building, you have to think of how large this energy pylon actually is, and yet it is taking them a long time to get around it, and Devastator is standing on one side, and when they finally get to him, he's like 500 feet tall. A lot larger than he typically is at any other point in the show. And I always found that one scene to be so weird because what's a good comparison that I can look at?
I don't think there is one.
Say the most recent Steven Universe episode where Fluorite is hiding behind the pillar and that robot is flying around trying to scan everybody. It's like that's the whole thing there. Devastator is hiding behind this pillar and the Autobots are going around it. And yet, it's like, okay, they can't see him yet. This thing is only so big. And they decided to draw him that tall and that large.
I noticed that, too. Like, if they did it on purpose.
But yeah, we have more Combiner teams that they eventually debut in the show. We have the Protectobots that just kind of show up completely at random in one episode. And they
like so many characters do.
Yeah, we kind of established this sort of throughout
like
the
Cosmos.
series, and that yeah, there are various Transformer colonies all around the galaxy, and they haven't been in contact with Cybertron for some time, and some of them wind up having a disaster, or they just leave their planet. They eventually find their way to Earth, and they join the main forces. And so that is where a lot of these characters just randomly come from, the Protectobots being among them. On Earth, they take the form of rescue vehicles, and they can turn into Defensor. The aerial bots and the Stunticons are done a little differently. We have an episode where we discover Vector Sigma, and the Decepticons are going on about how the Autobots, have certain advantages on the ground, so they go and make race cars, and then the Autobots are like, oh, yeah, the Autobots are saying...
jealous of the other side.
Yeah, so we want some jets, so we made the aerial bots. They take them to Vector Sigma, and they give them personalities in this way. And this is a different method from which we saw with the Dinobots, in which their brains were simply created. But here, Vector Sigma is literally giving these vehicles life.
Yeah,
I don't know why they didn't have Wheeljack play God again. Apparently he can do that.
You brought up the key to Vector Sigma, and I wanted to read a little bit of my notes here.
Sure.
Just because this is possibly one of my favorite episodes of the entire series. I wrote, the key to Vector Sigma's part 1 and 2 are by far the best episodes, story-wise, world-building, and character development-wise, as of up to the point where I wrote these notes anyway. They have character development and real consequences and a real reason for new characters to show up. No randomly, they were off-world bullshit. Also, it evened out the odds. The Autobots got jets and the Decepticons got cars. But, that's just a side note. I really liked those episodes because it was the first hint of, we have backstory. We're not going to just, let them continuously do repetitive, tropey Earth shenanigans. Oh, today we're going to the club. Oh, how many episodes away were we from seeing the Autobots try to go to a fancy dinner date? You know what I mean? I'm glad they got off Earth. I know a lot of people are probably really upset with the transition to Season 3 with the movie, but really, that's where the show kind of really opened up in a way. How did we not talk about Hot Rod and his transformation as well?
That's true, yeah. So Hot Rod was the second Autobot leader after the movie, during the movie. And while Optimus Prime was the ideal leader, the one you can look up to, Rodimus Prime was a lot more relatable. He chafed under his responsibility. He felt the burden of leadership. He had a hard time restraining himself and making his rash impulses not harm others. He was fascinating and great for completely different reasons than Optimus, and one of the better characters, I would say, from the season. Earlier,
you said that Optimus is Superman, right? Mm-hmm. Where Optimus is Superman, Rodimus is Spider-Man.
That's a really good way of putting it.
He is very much a coming-of-age story. He is a rash. You kind of said it earlier, or Airhammer said it. One of you guys said it. He's a rash hothead. He's not ready for leadership, and it's kind of thrust upon him, and he has to change literally into a new being for him. And he has a lot of terms coming to issues with the fact that he's a leader, and he doesn't always want it, and it's troublesome for him, and he's right up there in my book as one of the most in-depth characters.
Where Optimus was maybe the iconic example that children looked up to, Rodimus was maybe the character that a growing older child, since it had been going on for a couple of years, could relate to. As they were growing older, maybe having new siblings, having new responsibilities at school,
new chores, new family life responsibilities, they have homework they don't want to have to do, or whatever.
Yeah, he was very relatable in that sense. And while he was presented in a way that made him seem like less a character than Optimus Prime, in the end, his faults defined him and made him very, very compelling.
Yeah. He's very much more where you could look up at the Optimus Prime's character like a father figure. Rodimus is very much like a sibling character.
Are we finally ready to move on to plot and theme?
Yes, we are.
So I'm going to start this off with a little story time. The origin of Transformers as a franchise. Hasbro, as a toy company, licensed transforming robot toys from Japan, from a Japanese company called Takara, well, mostly from Takara. They went to Marvel Comics to develop a world and story and characters based on these toys, and Marvel Comics did so. Marvel Comics began printing a Transformers comic book, and Hasbro took this concept and made a cartoon out of it. So in that sense, it's a very mixed origin. In fact, I believe they used some Japanese animation studios to animate in an American style, making it a really, truly hybrid work. If you are a strict fan, someone who has a very strict definition of anime, Transformers is technically anime.
In a sense,
It was animated by a Japanese studio, but it's really a collaborative work, and one of the first. I think that leads to its popularity, personally, because you have concepts cross-pollinating.
It's not exactly the same story, but it kind of reminds me of the weird dynamic with Power Rangers.
Yeah, a
Power
lot of
Rangers
people
handled differently, but like
A lot of people
similar.
are under the impression that because the toys originally came from Japan, because the animation is from Japan, that it was strictly a Japanese thing that was localized, which is not true. It was made to be something distributed in the United States and Japan, and it was one of the first works in that sense that really got over and became a public sensation. So if you think Transformers was just made in Japan, you're wrong. If you think it was just made in the United States, you're wrong. It was a really, really interesting birth for this entire concept.
Yeah, a great collaboration. Toy handled most of the animation for, I would say, 3/4 of the series as a whole. ACOM, which is brutal in their style, and
We can go over that later.
did the second half, and then there were maybe 6 or 7 other studios that maybe produced 1 episode or 2 apiece.
Oh, that's the one I'm thinking of. Like, we can go over the different studios and their quality of art later. But, yeah.
And
there's some atrocious episodes.
The show didn't come out in Japan until 1985, so there was a good year or so that it was already out in North America before it came over and got a Japanese dub.
So I kind of had something to say in this section.
Okay.
There's it kind of fits here, I guess. The show kind of feels like it's fractured into multiple parts, if you will. We have one part, like the beginning, like 3 episodes, like the miniseries just building up the show for what it's going to be. Then you have seasons 1 and 2 in the movie, where you establish characters, build on the world. It's like all self-contained in the world, and then you kill them all off. And then you have season 3, which is like Star Trek, and season 4, which is just like, buy our toys. It's more like, instead of watching Transformers, one show we watched, it almost feels like we watched something more along the lines of Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, than just say Dragon Ball, or just say Dragon Ball Z.
For the first 3 episodes, the miniseries, I can forgive them because they thought at first that was all they were going to make, and they had no idea that they were going to make a series afterward. It makes some sense how
definitely
feel disconnected.
There's definitely context between all the different disconnects. Even season 4, there was a time gap, right, between.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think the biggest is obviously the season 2 till movie disconnect, where the movie leads into season 3, and it's also where the cast changes, so you have a 20-year time shift and a change of cast. Man, that is jarring.
Yeah. It's structurally weird. Like I said, it almost feels like you're watching multiple shows. Like, I'd seen the movie before we watched this. That's pretty much the only piece of Transformers media I'd seen. And, like, when we were building up to it, and I was remembering what I'd already seen, I'm like, man, they really did kill off, like, everyone they established.
Yeah.
It'd be like if you were watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and halfway through the fucking show, they kill off everyone but the butler and replace it with a new family. And they keep it the same show.
Oh, man. That's... you're not entirely wrong. I think, for one thing, it's kind of interesting because obviously the show exemplifies change and transformation, and nothing exemplifies that better than just rolling on. Completely new cast, completely new setting, time skip, and it changes.
Yeah, fair enough. It's a big transformation, if you will.
Yeah, I was always disappointed that we never really got to know what happened in those 20 years. There are certain characters that just flat out disappear, even the ones that we don't see killed off in the movie. Like for humans, we never see Sparkplug or Chip Chase ever again. For Autobots and Decepticons, like certain ones get killed off and other ones just completely disappear or are seen as background characters.
Maybe I kind of missed it or wasn't paying enough attention, but was it really ever established why, like in that 20-year gap, what changed from the fact from seasons 1 and 2, they're just contained on Earth. They're doing mostly Earth stuff. And then suddenly 20 years later, boom, everything's space. Like, they don't give a shit about Earth anymore. It's space. It's a big gap.
I wouldn't say they don't care about Earth anymore. The Autobot City's on Earth. That's where Optimus Prime fought and died.
I guess, like, or maybe it's implied that there are operations out there and the spacey type stuff that happens in season 3 was always going on. We just didn't see much of it.
I think when you get to characters like Ultra Magnus and Cup and Springer and bring them in, you have to assume that they were out there fighting the war for 4 million years while Optimus Prime and his crew were dormant in their comas. You have to think that those people were out there fighting other Decepticon leaders and Decepticon factions all across the galaxy. And that's one of the things I'd like to bring up right now.
Okay.
The plot is so loose outside of a few focal points, it becomes very easy to imagine things. We talked about fan theories earlier. We talked about inferring why Galvatron's insane and why he doesn't want to be anywhere near the hate plague. All this stuff is never actually said. It's all loosely inferred, things that your imagination makes leaps of judgment to. And Transformers is so rich in that. It is intensely rich in that. You can't help but make judgment calls in some cases. You want things to connect, so your mind, your imagination just leaps into action. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about it. That's one of the things that I loved about it as a kid, and it's infuriating to me as an adult trying to watch the narrative, is you have to use your imagination. So rarely is that used, and so often do people complain about it. I recently had a conversation with a friend who was angry about a time gap between X-Men films and not seeing what happened to Wolverine. I'm like, really expect them to do that? There's already 2 Wolverine movies.
And there's
and
also
people didn't like them.
Maybe it's important to the story that it's implied that nothing happened then. Maybe the Wolverine had some, relaxing time.
Maybe.
Like, why do you want to watch that?
Transformers, especially, more than any other show I've seen in a very long time, maybe more than any other show I've ever seen, embraces this untold side. We don't know why Starscream follows Megatron. We don't know how many people Megatron brainwashed. It is outstanding in that sense where you have to use your imagination, and maybe how annoying it is trying to view it as a narrative is a blessing to the creativity of the children that were originally watching it.
Yeah, you could fill in your own gaps. So it doesn't do all the imagining for you. You know the bare basis of what Starscream is, but you get to imagine his own backstory of why he's there.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's kind
I
of a
think
neat
that's
idea.
one of the reasons that maybe the franchise has flourished so over the years, is because the first introduction of this narrative that just gave you the skeleton of it and didn't try to fill in all the gaps for you.
And if you did want the
don't
gaps filled in,
know.
I'm sure the comics are there.
Yeah. I think it's also very interesting to note that you could probably imagine up your alternative realities very easily because you have a bare bones structure to build off of. What if Megatron and Galvatron weren't the same character and somehow the movie misled you? It would be pretty easy to think that up in your head because the parts are there and there's less to conflict.
At first, they were actually separate characters before the movie even came out. The illustrations that were coming out with the toys at the time showed them as completely separate characters working together.
So I think in that sense, it's a beautiful show in how it fosters your imagination, even forces it upon you, whether you want to imagine or not. You're going to imagine. And I probably didn't appreciate that enough as a child, and I certainly was frustrated at having to imagine at certain points in this. But I think it's one of the real earmarks of the show is how you get invested because your headcanon is so important to you, and you want to see that justified in some way.
I wanted to talk about a little bit about the plot as well. It's really bare bones and kind of, like you said, bland at the beginning. Or you didn't say that, but you said bare bones. I think it's kind of bland at the beginning. The stories of them just hanging out on Earth were kind of But like, it's a shame that they had to kill. They chose the catalyst of killing off a lot of characters to do it in a way. Even though the best of those characters are really iconic and in a way may have helped the franchise by stirring up drama and stuff. But like, I don't know, the plots once they got out into space were a lot more interesting. They did a lot more world building. They touched a little bit on it in flashbacks and minorly in the first 2 seasons, but really it felt like once they got out to space, you got a lot more interesting tidbits about the culture and the world that this universe takes place in. You know what I mean? You got to meet more of their creator, the race that created them. You get to see more about other pieces of the society of Cybertron. You get to see other alien races out there and see that there's a flourishing existence of other beings besides humans and the beings from Cybertron, whatever denomination they might be.
Cybertronian.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Cybertronian. I guess the Quintessons fit under that category, right?
They're more like invaders. They found Cybertron.
Oh, I thought it was that they. Maybe I misinterpreted.
Well, maybe I'm misinterpreting, but I believe they settled on Cybertron when it was lifeless, and then decided to build something out of it.
And then they built the Autobots, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they built.
Yeah, okay. So they're the Autobots creators, like.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, as far as I am aware, Cybertron was just a factory world for them, and they really didn't care about it. Not intensely. They just want their property back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a big giant empire. The planet itself is just another planet, but for the transforming beings, it's okay. I see. Yeah, you're right. They're not. They're cyber. That is their planet. They're not the same. See, I misinterpreted it. I thought that I didn't know that they were like maybe I missed that tidbit, that they were an entire empire self-contained outside that planet. I thought that was their home planet.
Well, see, that's another thing. Like, we don't know for sure because they gave us.
Are we both filling in our own blanks here?
We might be, and that's the beautiful thing. That's the fandom of Transformers. We just saw a glimpse of it, and that's what makes discussing it so interesting.
For me, that's the way I envisioned it. I envisioned that the alien beings that invented the Transformers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Evolved and became beings on that planet. It was their planet. Then they invented the transforming beings, to make their life better. They made the Autobots and the Decepticons, and then their whole story took off from there. But that's how I envisioned it, that they were natural to that planet. I thought that's the way it was.
And the difference between our theories and our impressions of it come down to either the lack of dialogue or one or two lines. That's how big a difference it can make. And that's what I love about it. That's why I still stay active in the fandom, because we have such diversity in how everybody sees it and how you can interpret it. And how fun would it be?
Because if you interpret it that way, if you interpret it my way, right, you can kind of see the quintessence point of view. Hey, it's our planet. Yeah, we created you, but we exist there. That's where
even then, you can still see it. Even if they settled a lifeless planet, does that make it any less theirs? If we went to Mars and built Transformers...
I agree. Like, is it any less theirs? But at the same time, it's less important to them. They can afford to get rid of it. Hey, yeah, okay, it was ours, but now we acknowledge that you're a sentient being that has attachment to this being this place where you spawned into existence. We get it. There's a difference. There's a difference in the story you're telling there, depending on which one you...
It is, and I think it's amazing. That's what I love about Transformers.
So what else do we want to say in plot?
I think there's some themes I'd like to discuss, at least one. I think Transformers overall, maybe it has to do with it being from the 80s, maybe it has to do with being for kids, but it's mildly conformist in a way that the Autobots are good guys and they fall in line with the Autobot cause. There's no one that really questions the Autobots waging war on Earth. There's Autobots that hate it and accept it, but nobody questions, like, hey, we really shouldn't fight here. We should, instead of focusing on stopping Decepticons, we should really focus on getting Decepticons back on Cybertron. Let them take a little energy, let them get on Cybertron, then blow up the space bridge so they never come back to Earth again. Nobody ever says that. They all fall in line with the war, the cause. They're patriots. And Optimus Prime is rather authoritarian, never in a negative way, but he is. That's part of his character trait. And he has those tendencies. And in a sense, this conformist thing with the authoritarian leader is very 80s. It's definitely something that would not be as welcome today.
Yeah, it's very, I guess it's another way that it's dated. It's this very, I won't say worship, but it touches on, or show hints of how important it is to, the chain of command is a good way to look at it. Like everyone looks up to Optimus and no one really questions thinking about like doing anything other than his orders. I mean, some of them do, but like no one ever really does.
No one wantonly disobeys him because they disagree with him.
Yeah.
I think the biggest example is Grapple, when he builds that solar tower.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest example of someone disobeying Optimus Prime. And he does that out of passion for his craft. He's not a soldier at heart. He's an engineer, and he really wants to build this solar tower. In a sense, it's very jarring to see someone disobey Optimus, because honestly, if Optimus was a person, I wouldn't disagree with him. The guy's amazing. The idea of questioning authority doesn't really come up, and that's more important in current society than it was back then. Or maybe its importance is more well known, I should say. But yeah, the idea that it's more mildly conformist definitely jumped out at me some. And as a kid, it didn't really matter.
Maybe it's more that it's acceptable to try and teach your kids to like not conform.
Maybe they didn't want to set an example that would upset parents. So we mentioned before how it's got heavy ties to the toy line, and while that helped them build really good characters that made it fun to play with as a child, it's hard to view it as a work of art by itself without being part of this greater product. it's hard to see the show as a pure expression. And that's not to say that, commercialism and marketing can't be artful, but it makes it very hard to remove it from that and view it any other way.
Yeah, I'd say majority of shows can be enjoyed and appreciated and loved even as a good show without having a single piece of merch of that. Transformers feels like it's something that having the toy or piece of merchandise or having a part of it, having something from it is part of the experience.
It was definitely intended to be, yeah.
Kind of interesting idea for a theme.
And
is that what I get what you're trying to say?
It's got positive and negative connotations because, in a sense, it cheapens it in a little way because this was made to sell toys and that these toys, these children's toys, are part of the experience. But at the same time, it's delightful if you were a kid and were able to engage in this experience and really be part of the...
it makes it a different type of art. Huh? It's easy to think less of art that is made purely for commercial reasons, right? It's easy to think down on, like, say, a painting of Ronald McDonald on the side of a McDonald's, right? Because it's there just to build their brand and advertise, right? But that's still a piece of artwork that someone painted and did, and someone was talented enough to do it, and it's still art.
Well, you have to remember Andy Warhol's painting of Campbell's soup can.
Yeah.
That's a statement that art is in the hands of the people and in the hands of the media and in the hands of marketing. And that soup can label is itself, it's got an aesthetic. It's meant to be pleasing. It has an eye. It's meant to advertise. It's meant to catch your
exactly. And that's what I said earlier when I said that you thought that you're going to be you're going to be surprised on how much of a commercial it's not. And I think in a way that there's parts that aren't really commercial. There's legitimate like backstory and plot that they found a way to work into. But a lot of the time it is very much a commercial, and that's okay.
Oh yeah, that it is.
I really thought going into it that like I was going to feel like slimy or gross or off-put by the commercialism-esque fact of it. I was really worried, like, is it really going to feel like a big ad? And it does. I'll be honest, and a lot of times it does. Like, okay, they're introducing a dozen new characters this episode because they have new toys to sell. But they introduce them in such a fun way, and each of the characters have their fun little neat gimmick that sometimes you find a character or two in the new ones introduced that you like.
And I guess that's maybe what my comment was about. It doesn't feel slimy.
Yeah. It is an ad, but it's not bad. Like the Super Bowl commercials, right? When you watch Super Bowl commercials, like they're adverts, but they're still fun.
Yeah, there's certain labels of products, definitely movie and game covers that are very eye-catching. Artwork done for promotions and such. Heck, look at certain card games. The card art is part of the merchandise, but it's also legitimate artwork upon itself. Magic the Gathering has an amazing catalog of well done art, and it's no less by being on a card that people play with hit points and attack and defense.
Speaking of which is pretty fucking cool, the Transformers is getting a Magic the Gathering card. Some
That's
sort.
True.
We don't know what it is, but it's getting one, and I'm going to try to get it.
That's very true. But yeah, the product placement, the merchandising that's tied into it definitely gives it a different feel. It gives it a different tone. You notice it.
It's evident that they're selling you stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the whole capitalism aspect of it, Airhammer?
Oh, it is just so grand.
I guess that's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's grand. It's on such a blatant scale that it celebrates it.
A property that has now gone on for 3 whole decades and is still continuing has made like billions of dollars in movie revenue, toy revenue. We have toy lines that are continuously going all the time. Like there are at least 3 different Transformers toy lines going. It's like even right now you'll have Robots in Disguise based on the most recent cartoon, Titans Return, which is a little more on the nostalgic, and then the new movie line. I just don't see it ever ending. And like that's even just with the toys. You still have the comics, the cartoons, the movies. It's all still going, and it is absolutely huge. Some of it may not even be as popular, like the movies, for example. Thank you to Michael Bay. But yeah, Transformers is one of the biggest things to ever be created, and I don't see it ending anytime soon.
Yeah, I think it's established itself as a pure evergreen franchise. It had some rocky moments between the end of the original cartoon and the beginning of Beast Wars. It had a couple years where it was actually off shelves and there was no real media other than reruns. But since Beast Wars began, there's been very little in the way of gaps or stops. They keep rolling out new toy lines and new media in some way or another. Whether or not it's good or bad, whether it's a lull in the franchise or a boom, they don't stop.
Want to move on to music and sound then?
Sure.
Absolutely.
First of all, we kind of didn't give it its own segment this time. We got to talk about the intros, which we'll have links to, like usual. The first intro is amazing and iconic. Or no, the second season intro?
The first two. Both of the first
two.
The first two.
Yeah. And then they ruin it.
Yeah, the season 3 intro is very different. It's animated by ACOM, and they decided to go with a completely
You know what make this song great? Let's throw it in a one-note acapella, dude.
Hey, it worked for Attack on Titan, damn it.
it's just one note. Oh, it's so bad.
We'll get.
They're
we'll
great.
Get
they have
Akira...
cool animation and they have cool scenes and clips from the episodes and all of them. I feel anyway. There's some of them that obviously are distinctly better, but like they ruined that song, man.
Transformers having sex with bees and eagles. Hot, hot.
It's.
Can we get Akira Tozawa from WWE to do a remix of the season 3 intro? Yeah, some people actually do find the season 3 intro theme to be their favorite. I have never been a fan. For those that need to know what we're talking about, you will hear it. You'll see a link in the description. But you have one or more men that just go, ha, 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 every couple of seconds in the song. And
when you put it like that, it's like fucking Titus and Yuna, the fucking...
Oh God!
There's so many remixes we need to make of this.
But I can understand that as the series continued, they were trying to make the theme darker, but this was not the direction to take it.
Oh man, we're gonna take the season 1 intro song and take Titus's laugh.
Okay, so about the original intro, the season 1 and 2 songs. I don't know what style of music that is. It's almost classical. It's a very timeless sound. It's not orchestral. It's not rock. It's not pop. But it's got a good sound to it. It's surprisingly complex. And while the vocals might be a bit dry, I think the sound, the actual music is very, very good. The season 2 intro is a bit more electronic, which was a very new style at the time, so they didn't go heavily into that. But they embraced the robot sort of theme and made it a slightly more electronic version for season 2. I think the song from season 1 stands out a little better to me, but my god, the visuals from both the season 1 and 2 openings, the visuals are so striking, so iconic. I think those imprinted on me so heavily as a child. I am elated every time I see them.
Yeah, I guess I should point out in regards to the sound, if you are ever watching the episodes online or you get some of the DVD releases, such as the Rhino release that came out like over 10 years ago, you are going to hear additional sound effects added to the intros. Why this was done, I have no idea. But outside of the music, you're only supposed to be hearing the typical weapons fire that you would get out of the show. If you hear anything else out of that and the transformation theme, it's been added by the studio that is releasing the episodes, and it's just off-putting to me.
The intros, when it's like not tampered with and not just flat out ruined, is great and iconic.
Mm-hmm.
I think the scene of Optimus and Megatron fighting atop that grid and being sucked into the wormhole, so to speak, in the beginning of season, or maybe at the end of the season 2 intro, was such an iconic scene to me in my childhood. That stood out so much.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what quality it was. Maybe it was the spinning camera. Maybe it was the grid itself and its Tron-like appearance. Maybe
they do that quite a few times in that, by the way. That's a neat trick that they do often. Or not often, but you don't see it a lot in other cartoons, but like where they do that. You'll see a lot of stationary shots with the camera in one fixed position so they don't have to redraw the backgrounds. Mm-hmm. If you pay attention in animation and cartoons, you'll notice that a lot. It's a cheap way to save money, right? Don't have to redraw a different angle on that tree or that house or that building or whatever the hell's in the background. But this show's not afraid to do that at times when it's dramatic. They'll tilt the camera, so to say, the view.
Yeah, I think that owes in part to how it was a hand-drawn show and not a computer composite show or computer animated. It's still difficult, but you have the option of doing that.
I think that it actually is probably easier to do on computer nowadays. But back then, if they would have done it on computer, it would have been painstakingly.
It's actually probably the same process, to be honest, since you don't have a character model. Unless it's one of the 3D animated shows where you have a 3D character model.
Yeah, fair enough.
The visuals of the intros are extremely memorable and very well animated, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. The initial shot of the Autobots swooping in at the start of the first intro and transforming was always so epic to me.
They had a lot of solid scenes in the intros. Even in the Season 3 intro where you have Metroplex swinging Trypticon around and it turns into the Rings of Saturn.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't dislike the art in the intro 3. It's just the music. I think it's better. The art is better in the first ones, obviously, but I don't dislike it in 3 as a whole. I just think the song is atrocious. Anyway, you want to talk more about different sound effects and music in the show? Like that iconic transform sound effect.
Oh, yeah.
It's so, they use it all over the place. And after a while, you almost stop hearing it, but not in a bad way. Like, it's there still, but you're like, it's just part of the world. It's very
such
iconic.
Such a satisfying noise to hear, too.
We'll play it right here. Just why not?
Yeah, it's the sound I get whenever I have a text message right now.
That's a good one.
It is unfortunate, again, with the transition into Japan taking over after season 4, that they started to phase it out. So you don't hear it as often in Headmasters and Master Force. You don't really hear it at all.
What was it? Something we watched from another one. I don't remember whether I watched it with you guys or not, but I watched something from some other thing, and they didn't have when they transformed. This one thing I noticed, they didn't have the sound effect. Regardless, tangent.
Yeah, that sound effect is very important to me.
Yeah.
And it was unfortunate that they got rid of it.
For other part, what do you think about the rest of the sounds, though?
So the background music is abundant. There was a lot of background music, especially in Season 1. Almost constant background music, and it's not bad. It isn't intrusive. It's mildly repetitive. And I think the best part of it is it's not campy or period locked. The background music is just this symphonic string quartet, I suppose. It's hard to tell. I'm not a music expert, but it's some strings and maybe a few brass instruments, and it isn't intrusive in any way. I guess the volume's a little high on a couple scenes, but it's not terribly loud.
Yes, Season 3, they definitely started to make it more action-oriented.
Yeah, you could definitely feel the shift. There's also, in between Seasons 1 and 2 and 3, we have to talk about the movie. The movie has this amazing soundtrack.
Okay, so remember what I just said about how the background music was not campy or period locked? The movie soundtrack is monumentally period locked. It is 80s.
It is 80s soundtrack.
Dripping 80s.
Yeah, you've got hair metal and Weird Al and Stan Bush, and this is such a high quality soundtrack. I listen to it all the time. When I'm doing my digibashes, I will be selecting random parts of it. I guess my current favorite is Escape, when they are just getting the transmissions from the moon bases and the second attack happens on Autobot City. I love that tune, among so many others.
It's actually a good point. Other than just the hair metal and 80s rock and power ballads and such, you have an amazing score also for this movie. Holy crap, that score. I think Unicron's theme is still one of the most stirring sounds, one of the most stirring songs you could hear in any movie.
Yeah, Vince DiCola did an amazing job with this movie.
Yeah, we could have a review of the soundtrack of just this movie alone. It's super, super good.
Yeah, you can find the whole score on YouTube, and I think they just came out with a new record release.
Good chance we'll have links. Anything else about the music before I want the voice actors, of course, are super iconic.
Yeah, the voice acting.
Optimus Prime's voice is just perfect. Who else could do it? Holy crap, it's good.
Yeah, so Peter Cullen is Optimus Prime, Frank Welker is Megatron, and Soundwave, and so many others. Chris Latta playing Starscream, Greg Berger is Grimlock, and so forth and so forth. Like, you have such an iconic cast here. Scatman Crothers, Casey Kasem.
You had Casey Kasem until you were...
Yeah. Yes, we can go on about that. We will go on about that.
You had Casey Kasem.
Yeah.
But you have such an iconic cast, and the thing is, these cast members were working on all the shows, including their counterparts, their rivals. So you had Peter Cullen and Frank Welker and how many others that were doing Transformers and simultaneously working on GoBots and Voltron and so forth and so forth. Yeah, it's a paycheck. It doesn't matter what you're doing. But
I think Peter Cullen did not do too many roles in this, but there are some characters that were, or some actors that were overextended. I think they had some great reuse of voice talent, but they stretched it just a bit too thin in cases.
Some
Chris
characters
Latta,
are...
for instance. Mojo, did you know that Wheeljack and Starscream were voiced by the same person? Sound nothing alike.
Yeah.
They sound nothing alike.
But at the same time, there's a lot of characters that have the same voice, like...
Yeah, exactly. Like Wheeljack and Sparkplug, the human, the older human, the father, he and Wheeljack have almost exactly the same voice.
It falls into that same thing that the voice actor in Gravity Falls fell into. You mentioned the exact same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think they did that once too many for practically every voice actor. It doesn't bother me at all that Optimus Prime and Ironhide are voiced by the same person because the voices are distinct. It doesn't bother me at all that Frank Welker voices I don't know how many characters like Frenzy and Soundwave and Megatron and etc.
Wheelie. And Wheelie.
No, Megatron and Wheelie were the same person.
And then, we mentioned Chris Latta, Starscream, Wheeljack, Reflector. Corey Burton, he was Brawn and Shockwave and Spike, and those were all distinct. Greg Berger, I know he did Grimlock. I know he did like maybe 2 or 3 others on top of that, but I'm losing track of. There was just so much talent on this show, and they made the characters their own. Whereas when it came to, say, like I'm saying, comparison to GoBots, outside of Frank Welker playing Scooter, these actors just kind of played random characters that had random parts. But on Transformers, these were the characters. You heard this voice, and it was such an iconic voice.
And to that end, crazy credit goes to the voice direction for locking in those voices and solidifying the characters.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we did lose the voice director very recently. Wally Burr, he was the voice director for the entire G1 series, as far as I know. He voiced Kremzeek in the episode Kremzeek. He filled in for the odd actor here and there when they weren't available. And sadly, he did pass away within the last week and a half at the age of 91. He was doing Transformers in his 60s.
They also had a great use of guest voices in the movie, which we already mentioned Leonard Nimoy. But you also had Robert Stack, Judd Nelson, Eric Idle,
John Machida Jr.
He became part of the regular cast. They kept him in the show.
Was he Blur going on? Because it sounded completely different.
Who else can talk that fast?
Anyone that tried to mimic it. I'm going to look that up.
I don't think anyone else could talk that fast. Maybe if they sped up the voice reel.
Maybe.
But the guest talent was outstanding.
Yeah, but
no, I guess you're right. I think it is just John Machida. Okay.
Yeah, he stayed on for the show. So good on him for not abandoning the show. So we talked earlier about Frank Welker taking over as Galvatron. Obviously, Frank Welker is a fucking legend. He's amazing. He is a voice actor supreme, and he took over the role from Leonard Nimoy. I think Frank Welker could have done this better. I think maybe he intentionally tried to make it different because maybe he was bitter about not being cast in the movie. Maybe he just wanted to say, hey, this is me, not Leonard Nimoy. I'm pretty sure he could have imitated Leonard Nimoy better, but chose not to. I wish that he would have tried harder. I wish that he would have made a voice more similar to Nimoy's depiction of the character, because I think he could have. He's good enough. I think he could have dug deep, found a way to do something closer instead of a higher-pitched Megatron without the grit. That will probably be the only time I ever critique Frank Welker's work, but I think he could have done better for that character. Maybe he didn't hear it, but he knew what Leonard Nimoy sounded like, so I'm pretty sure he could have tried something.
I always felt that because of the plasma bath and the whole insanity thing, that it altered the voice to compensate for what his personality was like.
Filling in the gaps. That's what Transformers is. That's what the tagline should be. Transformers, where you had to fill in all the gaps.
And honestly, filling in the gaps is never really that bad, except for little
I wasn't trying to imply it
parts
wasn't.
here and there. But,
so can I go on my Casey Keenum thing now?
Yes,
Yeah,
let's get this part out of the way, because this is...
this needs to be said.
Like, what the fuck, man? Carbomia? Like, seriously. Like...
Yeah, it's...
the backstory here. Casey Keenum voiced a whole bunch of characters in the show. The one I can think of at the top of my head is Cliff Jumper, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He did a bunch of others too, I'm sure, but like the one I know off the top of my head is Cliff Jumper. And he's a respected voice actor, man. He is iconic. He does so many characters, and you might know him as so many things, but what I know him as, he's Shaggy. He is Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Mm-hmm. And he's just a big, iconic voice actor. And Carbomia, really? Like, how did you not think it was going to not piss someone off? Like...
Okay, let me do this since you're a little wound up. In one episode in Season 3, they introduce a country for a very short skit called Carbomia. It is an Arab nation led by a dictator who is giving shelter.
Fakadi.
Yes, he is giving shelter to some Decepticons and claiming there are no Decepticons there. And the Autobots are trying to investigate and search for them. And it's offensive.
Not only is he a stereotypical Arab with a stereotypical Arab name, but he is the villain. Right out the gate, they make him the villain. He's like the hiding the bad guys, of course, because he's the villain in the Middle East, you know. And then he's like also Carbomia. Like,
yeah,
I just can't get over it. Like, how is that choice made?
Sensitivity and bad choices.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's not quite on the level as if somehow a character saying Hitler did nothing wrong was slipped into Sesame Street. It's not quite that bad, but come on. When I first saw this episode, Airhammer's laughing about it now. We paused the episode.
Yeah.
And I was just like blown away that could have happened. It still blows my mind. It's been a full 2 weeks since I've seen the episode, and it just every time I think about it, I'm just like, how?
Give context of why Casey Kasem in particular was upset is Casey Kasem was a Lebanese American, and he was not at all happy with that inclusion for no reason. It didn't pay off to anything. It was just there for the sake of being there. It was simply insensitivity after a few years from the Iranian hostage crisis was over. It was just leftovers from that, and honestly it had no place in any media, especially a children's show.
And what's silly is that even after Casey left, they still showcased Carbomia again in at least 2 other episodes.
That's just
So, yeah, that's what kind of sucks about the movie, in that out of all the Season 1 Transformers to survive, Jazz and Cliffjumper are the chosen 2 that really stand out outside of the Dinobots. And you have Scatman Crothers, who played Jazz, that died before Season 3 started, and then Casey Kasem realizes that this whole Carbomia thing is in there. He leaves, and so you have Jazz and Cliffjumper that should have continued on to be main cast members, and instead they just became background noise for maybe 2 scenes.
I'm going to go out here and say this now, that I know at this point Casey Kasem, like I said, because he's fucking Shaggy. He's the original Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. He's been voice acting for a long point at this point, at least 20 years, right? Scooby-Doo came out in 72, something like that.
Yeah.
Early 70s. And he's been Shaggy from the beginning, and he also did shit before that. He's an iconic person. He didn't need the Transformers check, so he wasn't losing much by leaving, but still good on him for making the decision. That was it was a fucking fucked up thing to do. And if you were offended by it, which you should be, good on him for leaving. I think
for every negative, there is a positive, and that positive, I think, came in Season 1 with Chip Chase. They didn't have to have a human in a wheelchair as one of the main human cast, but they did.
Oh, yeah.
They could have had him as a bit part where his wheelchair was his defining factor. They didn't do that. His wheelchair was never his defining factor. He was just a guy who happened to be in a wheelchair.
And it's great.
They dwelled on
Wonderfully
it.
done.
And it was, so, yeah, good on them for that. For every negative, there is a positive in this show. And in this case, I don't know how they managed to be so forward-thinking by accident.
I like to think that this is just a joke, but there's at least one episode where I want to say that he was faking it with the whole disability, because you can clearly see that while he's cheering for the Autobots, he is standing up and out of his wheelchair and sitting back down.
Okay.
That's just shitty error. That's okay.
Yes, I know. It's just an animation error, but bad error. Really bad error.
Yeah. But yeah, that was just... See, that's another thing. When we get to art, we're going to have to talk about the animation errors.
And speaking of, do we have more voice actors and sound effects to talk about, or do you want to move on to art and visuals?
I guess last thing I'll just say with Chip is that, again, I mentioned how after the end of Season 2, we never see him again. I always found that kind of bizarre. I thought that we would see him with an exoskeleton or an exosuit walking around and being a key scientist at Autobot City or something, but no, they just flat out ditch him.
Or plan out fixed at that point. Like, man.
Yeah.
If the Autobots are advancing technology for them that much, why not just, hey, we can find a way to fix your fucking legs.
Yeah, well, in The Return of Optimus Prime, that's what they do with Jessica. They have this exoskeleton that they bond to her, allowing her to walk. So I assume that Chip has something similar, but why they decided to discontinue the character after Season 2, I don't understand. Like, he was their human scientist. He was the brains. And you never see him again? I don't understand.
Fuck you, we have Perceptor, that's why.
Yes, that was the whole thing.
They get microscope.
They kill off Wheeljack, they kill off Ratchet, they kill off, well, okay, we don't know exactly what happened to Grapple and Hoist, but they are never seen again post-movie. Like, you see Grapple in the movie for like 2-3 seconds tops in the background, and that's it. And now, starting with Season 3, all we have is Perceptor as your scientist and First Aid as your medic, and that's it.
Fun fact, if you want to go back to my history of my tweets, you could see I was very disappointed with Perceptor when I thought he was just a transforming telescope. Or microscope, rather. I'm like, wow. Before I realized he was a triple change or whatever. I'm like, what?
Hold on. You know what? I'm going to get into this now and here. So, the Autobots were originally...
I know. I get
soldiers.
it fits in with their theme and all that, but still. Come on. If you could transform into a car... If you had a choice, just transform into a car. Oh man, I don't want to fucking walk to work. I'm just gonna transform into a car and fucking drive there. Oh man.
For the hell of it, again, pointing out that the original toy was a robot, a microscope.
I'm talking about that's outside the scope of this podcast.
I know, but he could turn into a tank. They just chose not to utilize that form. Even though the toy retained the tank treads, you didn't see them in the cartoon.
So,
yes.
Yeah, the long story short, I was immensely disappointed when I thought that he was just a microscope. I'm like, what?
Were you also disappointed at Soundwave turning into an awesome cassette player that's like
a little bit
hiding everywhere? Oh, that's Soundwave's so cool.
I don't know. I just think transforming into a vehicle.
Well,
there's a hierarchy.
Of them.
There's a hierarchy here. There's like household objects or like things that you put on your desk or hold in your hands. That's the lowest tier. No, what's lower than being the fucking cassette player is being the cassette. And then... and then you have the vehicles, the cars, above that. And then you have, tanks and, artillery and shit. And then you have the jets. That's my hierarchy of Transformers.
I can't wait till we get into...
Mojo's hierarchy of Transformers. Someone make me a chart.
Okay.
I can't wait till we get into Supplemental Media, because I'm going to blow your mind.
Okay.
Speaking of which, are we ready to move on to the next section?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Art and visuals. The show is based around real-world physical toys, and all the characters are designed after that.
Yeah, the character models are more based off of what was originally depicted in Marvel's comics. Their characters will be a lot more fluid in transformation. You will see various things just kind of mold into what they're becoming.
They just kind of melt. They just kind of turn into a pile of goo, and then they're the new form, and then Optimus Prime's cargo materializes out of his ass.
And then as you continue to watch the series, starting around 2000, 2001 with What's in Disguise, we'll see that they started to develop a different form where they are showing the character models as toy accurate.
Yeah, the character models are definitely the standout of this series. The art is really nothing special for its age, and today it looks a little bit hokey.
It has a very much comic book feel. It very much feels, in my opinion, inspired. You could feel the comic book inspiration in the way the art is drawn, though, and the artistic style of it.
Unfortunately, what I have to talk about most here are problems. Despite liking the character models, the animation errors. Holy shit, the animation errors.
What is that episode? What is the episode?
The episode, or what are you talking about? Which one? Are you talking about the one where
no.
each other? Are you talking about
the
absolute
one terrible shit show?
Oh, that episode.
Okay, so so the worst animated episode of the entire series is Carnage in C minor, and you have an error in every single screen. It's just wow.
Yeah, you have Devastator walking shoulder to shoulder with the Constructicons that make up Devastator. His limbs are standing next to him and the same height.
Where can you even start with this episode? Brawn and Huffer, who died in the movie, which appear fighting with the Decepticons for about 2 to 3 seconds, alive and well. Hotspot, who is the core member of Defensor. You see Hotspot and Defensor side by side firing at one point. Ultra Magnus being the size of a combiner, holding a Constructicon in each hand. Yeah. God, I can just keep... Broadside. He has his comic model, his original blueprint, so he looks vastly different from when you see him later on in the series.
For example, for people that aren't keeping up, it's like if you're an average height dude, you're friends with Shaq, who's a pretty tall guy, but every once in a while, Shaq becomes the Empire State Building.
Pretty much.
It's like it's just like no explanation out of nowhere. What the fuck? And also, there's another Shaq the same size as you, still right next to you.
Yeah.
Like you're like, what? What the hell's going on?
Oh, and Shaq is painted the same colors as Charles Barkley. I don't know why.
Yes. But yeah, this episode was animated by ACOM that we mentioned before, and they handled about, I don't know, I want to say 12 to 18 episodes in the series, and boy, did they do a crappy job. Some of their earlier stuff in season 2 is as bad.
Okay.
You made me swallow my cough drop. One moment.
Oh, dear God!
Yes.
Leave that in, please. Don't cut it out. Okay, I was talking about...
Oh, my God.
Welcome back.
What'd I miss?
We might keep this in. I'm not sure.
We might keep everything in.
No, that fucking Shaq bit, man, is probably one of the funniest bits we've recorded ever.
So for those returning, Mojo just swallowed his cough drop. Let's move on.
Well, that could be cough drop indulgence.
Transform and roll out.
Oh, God.
Okay, so, ACOM is this other studio that Hasbro and Sunbow went and used, and they did a little over a dozen episodes in the series. A season 2 episode that I guess I could point out right away is City of Steel, which isn't as bad, but when it came to season 3, it's like they just went super cheap and off the deep end. The start of season 3 is the 5 Faces of Darkness. This is a 5-part episode that just follows the events of the film, and ACOM was in charge of this. Yeah, it's like another miniseries, and ACOM did so poorly in this. It is bizarre. Characters being the various different heights, Autobots that will be in the background of a group of Decepticons, colored completely random. Like, I have a Digibash that is based on the errors in this 5-parter alone. A Seeker like Starscream and the others. These characters are never seen again, and yet you see one of them in the model, in the episode, colored like Onslaught, one of the Combaticons. 2 Shockwaves, again, another character that is never seen again post-movie. There are 2 of them in one scene, in fact, the same scene I'm just talking about, and they're colored like Mixmaster, one of the Constructicons. A version of Motormaster that looks like Cup. A version of Snarl that looks like Rodimus Prime. And the errors just continue on and on. It's like, who was drawing this? Where I know that
they had no references or something.
Yeah,
they only had no. I take that back. They only had like half the references. They had like they gave them the coloring book with those coloring guide things where you had this kid where like they had the numbers and you filled them in by number, right? But they forgot to put the numbers on the sheet, and so they just had to wing it.
It's like Rumble at one point is the same size as Soundwave. During Rodimus's flashback of the past, you see Sentinel Prime for a brief moment. Later on, you see one of the Constructicons colored in Sentinel's colors of blue and orange, whereas all the other ones standing in the same shot are the typical green and purple. ACOM is a headache, and for season 3, it is just mind-boggling how quality control, like someone actually approved this animation, said, yeah, go with that.
Well, again, it's hand-drawn. There comes a point where you notice an error, but it's too late to go back. You can't just computer wipe all the colors and start over. It is what it is. There's paint on those lines. You can't make a new copy. It's set.
Don't get me wrong. The show would be a better product if all the errors weren't there. But at the same time, they're kind of like part of the experience, right? The campy. Like you said, it's not very campy.
Yeah.
It kind of has a campy feel to it. Like, every time you see an error, oh, that character's colored wrong, or there's 2 of them, or that guy's the wrong size, that is along the same type of geeky, like, nerdiness you get the feel when you watch Star Trek and you see Shatner's cup on the fucking rock.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, you can't just watch it with the same idea that, oh, I like One Piece, let's try Transformers. What the fuck? No! No! Like, don't think of it that way.
And I'm not going to completely fault ACOM for everything that went wrong, because Toei had their issues at points, but I actually want to focus on another thing, and that is Rhino, which I mentioned before. They did the first DVD release, and for some reason, they felt the need to throw in their own unnecessary edits to this program. You will find brand new coloring errors designed just by Rhino alone. So in...
It's like did they know that they were fucking it up and they did more on...
I have no idea.
Was it a statement? Let's fuck it up more? Let's take that piece of graffiti on the wall and, like, draw a butt on it?
Yeah, so just for an example with Season 1 alone, let's take SOS Dinobots, where they debut. The scene where they are charging their attack inside the Autobot headquarters, and Slag's horns will glow, Grimlock's mouth glow, and then you're supposed to be seeing Sludge's eyes glow, but for some reason they just don't. They decided to take that out. In another episode, you'll see Trailbreaker colored red like Ironhide. In another episode, you saw Skyfire colored like Skywarp for some reason, all of a sudden.
Maybe they thought that they were fixing things?
I guess we could also mention Call of the Primitives, which is considered the best animated episode of the entire series. We don't know what studio did it. They did it in more of a refined anime style, and it is perfect pretty much throughout the entire thing. Like, they had very few errors.
It's also some of the best drawings of the characters in general. Some of the best animation.
Mm-hmm.
I think the worst thing about that is the character model for Primacron, who probably wasn't designed by them. It was probably handed down to them.
I want to go back for a moment and say that really, really shitty episode we talked about, like, it's still worth watching. It's enjoyable for its shittiness. Like, every once in a while you get those things that are so bad it's good. That one's the train wreck. If you enjoy the rest of the show, you'll appreciate it for how shitty it is. You're like, what the fuck? It's not quite the train wreck that Carbomia was, but someone decided to put that out there in the world still.
I'd like to point out one thing in the animation errors that is a reoccurring animation error throughout almost every episode, and that is, I don't know if it's an error or just an oversight, but scale. We talked earlier about how Bumblebee can be the size of a person or the size of a car, how Optimus Prime can keep a human in his hand or have them up to his knee, how Devastator can be 500 feet or just the normal size of a few construction vehicles stacked on top of each other. The inconsistent scaling can really be jarring and confusing. One of the worst examples for me is in Transformers the movie, one of the best animated parts of the entire series. Galvatron is riding inside one of his subordinates. Yeah, he is just riding inside Cyclonus.
Yeah.
And Cyclonus transforms and is the same height in robot mode as Galvatron, where he's...
Almost, but yeah.
Well, yeah, he's shorter. He's shorter than Galvatron.
Actually, he's taller.
Taller? Oh, well, I guess with the horns, yeah. He's got the weird horns. Anyway.
Yeah, the mass shifting thing.
I wish they would have used that as a story element rather than just, we don't care.
Yeah, there's no explanation for it in the show, right? Like, it's just errors. They fucked up. They could have easily said, oh, they're Transformers, and part of their transformation is that they change size.
And this is apparent. Look at Soundwave. Look at his cassettes. Look at Megatron. They all change size when they transform. that is by design. And there's a lot of the same mass shifting not done by design that are just wrong. And I wish they would have at least tried to cover their tracks, at least tried to write some lore around it, acknowledged it.
Yeah, just give us a scene of Bumblebee legitimately shrinking down to his human size before you show him human size. Turn it from being an error to being part of the thing.
I remember how a lot of Season 1 was about stealth and infiltration. So you'll see the start of an episode in particular, I forget which one, where Soundwave and Megatron are just sitting outside this building at night in their alternate modes, but Megatron is inside a guitar case like you would see a typical, like a gangster hiding his gun or something. And the security guard picks them up, takes them inside, he locks up the case in a cage or something, and then Soundwave releases like Laserbeak or Ravage, who then opens up the cage, then Megatron finally is released and transforms. So, yeah, that was always kind of neat.
I was a child when this came out, so seeing that was particularly confusing for my young mind. I had a lot of questions, and unfortunately there was nowhere to look to ask. There was no fan base, no internet. I had coloring books, right? That was the extent.
Man, that's the second time we've referenced coloring books this podcast.
I know. Other than that, we mentioned before that it's dated. I think some of the backgrounds are actually really well done, because you have that really warm, hand-drawn aesthetic that you don't see very often today. Unfortunately, you still have that's the rock that's going to blow up when they shoot it, because that's the one that's drawn by the animators and not painted.
Yeah.
There was another big art inconsistency that I guess it fits into the scaling, but you guys didn't mention it specifically. Is that the head of the big bad from the movie?
Unicron.
Yes.
Yeah. Unicron. It's like a satellite around Earth. It's hovering somewhere.
Cybertron.
Sorry. Yeah. Sometimes it's a big thing you could land on. Sometimes it's like not so big at all. It's like,
yeah, in the movie, Unicron is absolutely massive, and when Hot Rod flies the Quintesson ship into his eye, you see that the eye and the ship are roughly the same size. But then when Unicron's head is introduced in Five Faces of Darkness, Cyclonus and the Sweeps fly up to it, and now they are roughly the size of the eye, and they crawl in.
Yeah, it's like a big room.
Yeah.
And then later they go back to it, and it's several big rooms.
Yeah, Unicron's head changes design based on like each episode and each scene that he's in, from varying in how destructive he looks and torn apart. It's always messy.
That's a big example of inconsistent scaling, though. You're right. In fact, the entire planet of Cybertron and scale of Unicron himself are very inconsistently depicted, to the point where I have no idea how large Cybertron is. They show it near Earth a couple times in one of the better episodes. I still have no idea. Perspective does not help.
Nope.
Yeah. It's one of those things you have to fill in.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, scaling is one of the biggest chronic problems in the show. And I don't think it's going to be ignored, even if you want to, even if you're a fan of the show. It's an issue.
Definitely. It's just, you're going to have to accept that it's there. They fucked up a lot. It's part of the show, kind of.
Yeah, even if you accept the fact that a robot that turns into a pistol can be the same height as a robot that turns into a truck can be the same height that turns into a jet, even though those are all three vastly different sized objects, even then, they screw it up.
Yeah.
I know one of the episodes we didn't watch involved a space shuttle rolling along a single lane of a highway. Have fun with that.
That's funny.
Yeah.
How about we move on to merchandising and fans?
Sure.
Yeah, this is the part where Aram and I are intimately familiar, because we've been fans for years.
How many figures would you think you even...
How many do I own in total?
Yeah, like, I doubt we've documented this, but give me a completely off the top of your head random number that you think it is.
150?
That's it? Okay.
Currently, yes. I did lose a lot of my childhood toys to a house fire.
Yeah, very unfortunate.
So yeah, that's what I own currently, because I lost a lot of my earlier ones.
I'm going to guess a ballpark for myself of over 600.
That is a lot of figures. I mean, they can't really say anything as a person who owns like fucking 40 Rubik's Cubes. But like...
But yeah, I have a lot of figures ranging from all but only a couple of the major lines.
Oh man, display area is the bane.
Yes. One day I would like to have everything that I own on display if possible.
Every collector, no matter what you collect, knows that feeling.
So we mentioned before a few things about this, but I'll reiterate. The franchise revisits almost all of its branches. Almost all of them are reiterated or given homages at least. The original show had such a weird fragmented story that you got to play with your toys and fill in the gaps with your imagination. It can build on the character-driven nature of the franchise by letting you hold this character in your hands, or a effigy of the figure, right? Or effigy of the character, I should say. There are so many lines and themes and play gimmicks that I don't even know where to begin with them.
Mm-hmm.
In general, I think almost all Transformers do transform. There was one line in the early 90s that didn't, but that line also revisited some of the earliest core characters from season 1 and 2. So, in a sense, you kind of have to forgive them.
Yeah, we had the Action Masters. The idea was that they were becoming super powered in some way. I forget exactly how it went, but they had to sacrifice their ability to transform in order to get this power. And so what we had was little articulated figures that rode in separate vehicles.
Just action figures. That to people aren't just normal action figures.
Yep, they could swing their arms and bend their legs, and they either had a fellow robot companion that transformed into a weapon, or they came with a vehicle playset, which could also transform.
Other than that, all the mainline Transformers do transform. I think there's a couple modern lines of just little figurines that don't transform, but yeah, almost exclusively they've maintained that core idea, which they should. It's the basis of the entire franchise. Even if they transform into fictional vehicles from space, even some of the later Season 3 characters did this, though. Even if they do that, they still at least crunch up and try to hide some of the robot parts. I think all of them hide the face and hands, or try to. I'd like to point out that a lot of the comics did roll in some of these later characters in one way or another. In fact, there was just a handful of Europe-only toys, so good on Europe for actually getting something for once. You guys deserve it. But in general, unless you're getting more into the comics or the super obscure Japanese series that never got an official release, the characters won't really resonate with you. I guess the biggest one is DaisZX, which is a repaint of Scorponok.
Yeah, I was just curious, like, there's obviously the run of toys that were for the characters in the show. Do they still make faithful to the original show adaptions of, like, a lot of figures, or do they only, like, okay, the most current show has this version of Bumblebee where he's not a bug anymore, he's in some other car, and so we only make Transformers of Bumblebee where he transforms into that car?
Yes to both. They have lines for the new show that is currently airing. They have lines for the movie. They have lines for nostalgia trips that are more accurate to the TV show than ever before.
That's cool.
I'm going to date this podcast a bit, but we just got word of a brand new Starscream. We got word of a brand new Rodimus Prime. We got a really nice Bumblebee on shelves. Unfortunately, they couldn't license the VW Bug, but it's still a small mini car. He's still very much the same character. They really have gone out of their way to make newer, better versions of these original toys.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
The characters.
We're even getting new versions of a couple of Master Force characters, Darkwing and Dreadwind. They're going to be in more of a Combiner Wars style, and we haven't seen them since like 87, 88 either, so that'll be neat.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a gift set with Metal Hawk in it, and he was only in one of the Japanese shows.
Yep.
We're getting a Japanese-only villain soon on shelves.
That's pretty neat.
So they have really, really embraced the people who kept the series alive, and I, for one, appreciate it. That's the line I care most about. But even then, I think the lines for the new shows really should not be ignored either. Though this episode of the podcast is about this show, I think it's great that they haven't slipped and let the original show dominate. It should never have dominated the franchise.
Yeah, it's kind of neat that they seem to have iterations that they expand on.
So. We're not going to talk much about the Michael Bay movies because they are not Generation 1 Transformers. They're a retelling of a very different story. They are outside of the scope of this podcast. But I would like to say that they've had an impact on the franchise. And obviously, a lot of people think they're bad movies. I'm not even going to get into that now. But I think the people that feel like they're bad movies and feel betrayed by it feel a lot of ways similar to what maybe the 60s Batman fans, when the Adam West show came out, felt like, where they had a more serious detective character that was now goofy and not their Batman. I think there's a parallel in how some of the fans feel like the Bay films aren't their Transformers. I think that's obviously a little blown out of proportion because the movies have been financially successful and brought the franchise into modern thought again. People think about Transformers again.
That's what I was going to bring up, that they brought them to the light again.
Exactly. So regardless of whether you like the movies, dislike the movies, hate them, love them, it's not important here, but I would like to mention that there's a lot of fans that don't. And some people feel betrayed, some people feel gracious that at least it's giving them something to enjoy, even if it's not related. But it has definitely had an impact. The last 10 years or so have been an interesting ride as a Transformers fan, because that's when we started getting the remake toys, the really high quality ones of the original characters, and it's the same time frame that the movies began.
Yeah, you kind of have to wonder, those toys you loved, are you getting them because of the movies you hate?
You'll never know. Another big thing I'd like to talk about is consumerism. Obviously, it's a driving force of the franchise. They want to sell toys. There's also a risk behind it, because if you can only equate the narrative, the character, along with the toy, if it's an incomplete experience without it, then where does that leave you? Where does that leave us as fans? Yeah, exactly. So you always have to be able to appreciate it independently and understand that there is this other level if you so choose. If the media ever becomes you have to buy the toy to fully enjoy it, I think that's where it's failed.
Oh, definitely.
And that's a discussion I definitely wanted to bring up, because a lot of the fandom is about collecting, and a lot of us really enjoy our collections. Same could be said for any collector.
Oh, definitely. Every character collector who collects anything, whether it be magic cards, pop figures, video games,
baseball cards,
rubber ducks, fucking whatever. Whatever you collect, like, if you're passionate about it, you're going to be passionate about it. Like, you're going to love and hate your favorite things when you feel that they're stained upon it. I get the hate for the Transformers movies. Like, people, I haven't seen it myself, but like, or I've seen one of them, but I can understand not liking something that you feel doesn't respect your source material. But at the same time, it's bringing better than nothing, right? Or it, I don't know.
It's very clear that those movies were not made for fans of this show that we're talking about on this podcast. So that's why I'm not even going to talk about them at any extent other than the impact they've had on the fans here.
Yeah, the whole thing of, I think it's been going on for the entire franchise. It's not even the movies. Like, it started with Beast Wars, when you had a lot of people that were looking at Optimus Primal and they're like, truck knock monkey!
People hate
like
change.
Stuff like,
it's just people hate change.
And, it's never going to go away.
There were comics from Marvel early on, right when the series launched. It was not the exact same narrative, but I would say an alternate retelling. There was still Transformers crashed on Earth 4 million years ago. They still rewoke today, but there were divergent paths, let's say. Shockwave, for instance, instead of being extremely loyal, he was almost like Starscream. He wanted to take over the Decepticons. He saw Megatron as illogical, and he was wasteful of Decepticon resources, and Shockwave would have been a much better leader. So Shockwave set out to defeat Autobots and Decepticons alike and end the war because it was a waste of energy. That's one example of a significant change made in the Marvel Comics run. There was also a Marvel UK run where they would have their own supplemental stories. And for people in UK, good on you for getting something unique again.
Like, both lines ran simultaneously for 7 years, but in the United States, there were only 80 issues, whereas in the UK, they had 332.
More recently, other than Marvel, there were new Transformers comics by a group called Dreamwave Comics, who unfortunately went bankrupt and out of business mid-run. After that, a company called IDW picked up the Transformers license and began publishing their own comic books around Transformers. They've done such a bang-up job with it. They've done a few award-winning issues that Hasbro has now licensed their entire toy franchise to IDW to make an entire Hasbro universe in their comics. The IDW comics are also very divergent. They have a lot of the same ideas, but they get through the original war very quickly. And they do fill in a lot of those gaps of what happened off-world. Why is Starscream loyal to Megatron? Why does Megatron bother keeping Starscream around?
That's what I assumed, that the comics would fill in some of that.
It absolutely does.
But it's a different continuity with those gaps filled. Yeah. It's still neat.
It kind of has to be. It has to be. But they also fill in a lot of the post-war stuff. And in fact, I think probably half their run now has been after the war is over and the Autobots won. What happens to Cybertron? The Golden Age has begun, but there's still a lot of unaligned Transformers who see both warring factions as equally villainous and don't particularly like the Autobots. Starscream has gone on, instead of being killed by Galvatron, he's gone on to become an elected president of Cybertron, filling his true calling as a slimy politician.
That's funny.
Megatron and Galvatron are separate entities, and Unicron hasn't appeared yet, but they've done some really nice stuff. They've also done a few bonehead stunts. There was some really shitty crossovers. I hate events in comics. That's a personal thing, but I absolutely hate events where all their comics are rolled into one multiversal bullshit. They've done a couple of those.
Since it's the Marvel Universe that we have had a variety of different crossovers in the original comic line, so you'll have Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Marvel superheroes, so you'll have like Transformers interacting with Spider-Man or the X-Men or the Avengers or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That absolutely has happened. Out of continuity, obviously.
Yes.
So, after the comic books, I think the next most important thing to touch on is Beast Wars and Beast Machine series, which did air and are absolutely in continuity with this show in the distant future.
I'm not sure if an exact time frame is given. I was under the impression from what I've heard over the last several years that it's about 300 years later. Beast Wars does not follow the Japanese continuity in any way. And it's also kind of a hybrid of cartoon and comic. They will throw in the odd little comic element from G1 into it.
I'm looking forward to watching another show in the same continuity, and I'm also looking forward to just watching maybe another revisit of the same story, like when we get to see Animated. Is the one we took a peek at.
It's the same idea, different story.
But still, it's a retelling, right? It's a different continuity.
Sort of. You'll see. You'll see when you get there. Animated is highly recommended to fans of this, but not the same story retold. And then we have some video games. We've got, I don't know how many mobile games, like 10 mobile games or so that involve Generation 1. There's a lot of mobile games that...
Shovelware,
some of them, there's a lot of them that do crossovers with the original Transformers and whatever show's on, and the movies. It's really hard to tell which ones are very pertinent and which ones just feature characters. There was a Japanese NES game notoriously bad. You play as Ultra Magnus.
Yeah, that one's... Yeah, Mystery of Convoy came out December of 86. There are 10 stages. There's one hit kills. There are no continues. There are, like, you can do a controller combination to go back to the stage you're killed on or anything. But it is brutal. There was a sequel game called The Headmasters, which came out a mere, 8 months later. And that one changed it up a bit. You had a health bar. There were multiple different characters you could play as, although you had to unlock them first. And they changed up the gameplay. There were 4 different worlds that you had to play on, and they had 2 stages apiece. In one stage you're in robot form, and the other one you're in vehicle. And, pretty different.
Sounds like a totally different game.
Mm-hmm.
I know there were another couple earlier games, but I don't know them very well. I think there was a Commodore 64 one. Maybe it was something else.
Yeah, you'll if you watch the Angry Video Game Nerd episode on Transformers, he does a cassette video game. I forget what it was for, but there's that one, and damn, that one's old school. They don't even bother to have real interaction. It's just
a story. It's a
names and numbers represent your characters.
There was also a Japanese-only PlayStation 2 game. I have no idea how good it was. So far, we've not talked about quality video games. One of the real gems of recent years is the quality video game of Transformers Devastation, and my god, does it look gorgeous. It's as if they took the animation models straight from the movie and made them 3D character models.
Mm-hmm.
Gorgeous, gorgeous game. Little clunky with the camera, but otherwise, Transformers through and through.
Is it just like a shooter action game?
It's an action game. It's made by Platinum Games, I think.
I forget.
What type of game, gameplay-wise, would you say?
Combat.
If you were to name another game similar. Third-person combat.
Third-person shooter. Yeah, third-person combat. You obviously also have hand-to-hand combat. The playable characters are Optimus, Bumblebee, Grimlock, Wheeljack, and Sideswipe. And it has a great deal of the original voice cast reprising their roles. It's built in continuity with the actual show, presumably somewhere in that 20-year gap.
Neat.
Yeah, there's only a couple of changes in the game. Megatron being a tank, and we're introduced to what I assume are supposed to be Vehicons, which we see in Beast Machines. That's where the term at least came from. They basically look like throttle bots, but, there's many of them. They're trying to pad out the Decepticon forces for the video game to have troops, so we see a variety of different...
The minions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're minions.
Disposable minions where you can have hundreds of them slash your way through for experience
points. Same for generic seekers. We also see a lot of generic seekers.
Yeah.
I think that's it for supplemental media. As I mentioned, animated is close. Prime is close, but they're not quite retellings. They're definitely not in continuity.
Yeah, I guess I could quickly go over the other programming from G1. We have an OVA that Japan put out.
Scrap City.
Scramble City, yeah. It's supposed to act kind of like a bridge between seasons 2 and 3, or more to be season 2 in the movie. We are seeing the creation of Autobot City. Ultra Magnus is introduced, but then at the same time, at the very end, the introduction of Metroplex and Trypticon, which kind of contradicts how they are introduced in 5 Faces of Darkness. So I think there's supposed to be somewhere in there that explains the continuity issue, but I don't remember what it is.
Retcon!
Something like that. Blaster's cassettes are also introduced, and the entire concept of the show...
this show really does show its comic book origins. Retcon, errors all over the place. And
for the most part, the whole thing is supposed to be...
Optimus died and then came back to life. You can't get more comic book than that.
Mojo, I just realized that by your definition, the New Testament is a comic book.
God.
I do.
While the show did finish with season 4 here and continued in Japan, we did get a season 5, but this one was kind of bizarre. We had kind of an animatronic puppet of Power Master Optimus Prime that interacted with a kid that went by the name of Tommy Kennedy. And it was supposed to be like set in a war zone, and Optimus is telling Tommy all these stories about the Autobots' adventures in the past. And so season 5 consisted of 20 episodes.
Oh yeah, I read about that.
It's like 5 of which were just the movie split up into 5 days.
Like, what the fuck? That's not even a season. Daz, you know how you complain about like the first 4 episodes of Castlevania being called a season? I complain about that being called a season.
I'm with you.
Because that's just a recap. Yeah. That's a season-long recap. I'd be pissed.
Yeah. The weird thing about these select episodes is that they chose a lot of multi-parters, and then out of the clear blue, one of the episodes is Surprise Party, which is the one where Daniel and Wheelie go in search of trying to find out when Ultra Magnus was created so they could give him a birthday party. It's like, why was that episode out of all the others selected?
We didn't watch that episode. We didn't watch that episode.
No, we didn't.
And I love that that line always in season 3 they have this recap segment where like, oh, this character is great because of this and this and this or this. And it's like fourth wall breaking. Like the narrator's talking to you, the viewer, about why this character is so great. He loved this character so much that he went out of his way to find out his birthday. And I always wondered, like, what the fuck? I must have missed that episode because I don't remember that plot. And now, Supplemental Media, brought to you by Airhammer's interpretation as a blur.
Ludicrous Speed! Go!
The only ones to really talk about a Japanese series, so I'm going to try and do this quickly, and I'm going to go spoiler on this, so just extra precaution for those who haven't seen it. I am going to be going into a little bit of quick detail. For the beginning here, we have Headmasters. What Takara did was they completely negated the rebirth of season 4 in America. They're like, okay, we're not going to bother with that. We're not going to show these nebulan alien characters interacting and becoming side partners to the Transformers. We're going to do things a little bit differently. So we're starting Headmasters out by introducing a whole group of new Transformers that have come from the planet Master. These are the same characters that we saw in season 4, but they're a little differently. So we have Chrome Dome and Hardhead, Brainstorm and Highbrow, and the Decepticon counterparts that have shown up on this planet. And what we learn is that instead of introducing nebulan aliens, these were actually another Transformer colony that got separated, landed on this planet, and had to struggle to survive the environment. And these were Transformers that were about the size of humans. And so what they did was they created their own robot bodies that they called Transtectors, and they turned into the heads. And thus we have their version of the Headmaster. And yeah, the series still follow the G1 continuity that we know, so we still have Optimus Prime back from the end of season 3. Yeah, and Hot Rod, Galvatron, etc. However, Takara decides to go the extra distance, and within the first 2 episodes, they kill Optimus again. It's like, okay, Hasbro, kids, you wanted Optimus back, fuck you, we're killing him again, Rodimus is back in charge. And it's ballsy, but they even go even further from here, because about, halfway through the series, they decide to completely flat out destroy Cybertron. Like, the planet is gone. And they have Rodimus, Cup, and Blur take off at random after its destruction. It's like, okay, we're gonna go find a brand new home planet, you're never gonna see us again, Cerebros, you're in charge, we're going, bye-bye. And so, that's it, you never see those 3 characters again, they are gone. Cerebros is left in charge, he's the Headmaster, who becomes the head of Fortress Maximus, and hell, they even kill off Ultra Magnus. Ultimately,
like I said, comic books. Big,
Yeah,
big sweeping events. It's not events in the scope that you said with crossover comics stuff, but like big sweeping events and scenarios happening that just cause drastic changes to reboot the series. To reboot
then, on top of that, we have Galvatron getting frozen in Alaska somewhere. Scorponok takes control of the Decepticons, and then all of a sudden, at the end of the final battle, the Autobots and everybody, they're just like, okay, finally, we're going to take this out in deep space. We're leaving Earth for good, and that's where they finally decide, okay, that's the end of Transformers on Earth. That's it, and that's how Headmasters ends. And you would think that would be the last of it, but no. Only like 10 months later, we get Super God Master Force, which is like it's a little bit more self-contained. Back in like I want to say primitive age, we had a group of Autobots and Decepticons that wound up on Earth. The Autobots in this case had a technology that allowed them to project themselves as human, and so they decided to look more like the primitive humans of the time, whereas the Decepticons wanted to take the form of demons. The Autobots
Transformers got weird.
Oh yeah, so the Autobots
The Japanese got hold of it.
Yeah, the Autobots defeat them and then continue to simply live their life on the planet in human form. And you would have to think, okay, this entire time that G1 that we know has been happening, why did these Autobots never come to their aid? They've just been sitting in Japan in human form this entire time, watching these events unfold. And there's nothing in storytelling. Yeah, there's nothing that explains why this happened. But then all of a sudden we have some new kind of evil force that they call Devil Z that shows up. It releases the Decepticons and then brainwashes a human couple into thinking that they are like evil Decepticons. And we have more transtectors that are debuting in the show, and kids are involved, and a new body that was originally meant for Optimus Prime gets used by human, and the whole thing is just it's crazy. That's the best way I can put it. And
just went off the deep end.
this is where the whole concept of the Pretender line came for the US market. We didn't have a cartoon that followed, but we had the toys. After this, we had Victory, which brought new Transformers to Earth. It's never really explained, but there's supposed to be this Galactic Peace Alliance. Starsaber is now the Autobot leader, having succeeded from Cerebros sometime off-screen. Shinrai, who is a transtector that was meant to be for Optimus, he looks just like Optimus, is still around, and you have a variety of new Decepticons led by DaisZX. He has Brainmasters and the Multiforce and the Breast Force, don't snicker. And they introduced the Micromasters, and that's another big one. Following that, we had Zone. This was an OVA only.
Shows were there?
A lot, and they came out every other year. Zone was an OVA, and this one depicted a demonic creature known as Violent Jiger that brought back 9 of the Decepticon generals. So most of the Combiners, Trypticon, Overlord, DaisZX, they all return. They're given capes and armor, and they basically do his bidding, attempting to collect what is called the Zodiac, which was some form of energy or entity that could have possibly created the entire universe. TV Magazine finished off the rest of the series, which was only like 10 or 12 issues after that. Then they finished off with Battlestars, which brought back Optimus Prime and Megatron. And then we got Operation Combination, which brought us a couple of G1 Combiner repaints and some new Micromasters, and that was about it. And finally, I can say that is the end of G1 in Japan. Finally ending in 1992 when we were starting to get the Action Masters line over here, and then Generation 2 started.
I'm not gonna lie, I am not gonna watch any of that. Like, none of that. None of that even sounds remotely interesting. Like, don't get me wrong, I can get behind Transformers come to Earth, turn into cars. But I don't give a flying fuck about, like, I had to stop from zoning out the entire time you're talking about, like,
Yeah,
and everything, you're like, I'm like, okay, this is gotta be the last one. You're like, and then, I'm like,
well, Shout Factory.
every time, like, it's getting further and further away. It's like Digimon. Every season they add something weird.
Yeah.
And now they get inside the heads. And now Optimus Prime's back. And now he's back for like the 4th, 5th time, or whatever. Like,
Did he get towards Breast Force? Wait, what?
like, I am just beyond.
Shout Factory has released Headmasters, Master Force, and Victory in DVD sets that you can find in stores or on Amazon.
No,
they only have English subtitles, so it's still in the original Japanese
Even less
vocals and
interesting.
music. Yes, I know.
Yeah.
They're good for what they are, but it is venturing off in a completely different
Wire
direction than what
takes
you're
them,
used to. I guess the only other supplemental thing that I can mention really quickly is Generation 2, which I just brought up. It was a quick thing that Hasbro did between 1993 and 1995. The toy line brought us a few figures back while introducing a lot of new ones, including the European exclusives, but they were all done in radically crazy colors.
That was the Neon era of
Yeah, that was the Neon era. The cartoon was 52 of the 98 episodes, done in a completely random order, and they added the bonus of the Cybernet Space Cube, which was this 3D model Cybertronic cube thing that added extra graphics and scenes to the existing episodes. It was kind of silly and unneeded, but that's what they did.
No, go past this. Past this part. In fact, never play this again.
Comparisons, inspirations, and influences. For
Okay.
one, let's go ahead and say it. Pulp sci-fi. Star Trek, Star Wars, a lot of the old Flash Gordon sci-fi, mostly live action stuff.
Especially when it gets to season 3.
Obviously Marvel Comics, because Marvel made the original narrative and characters.
Comic style storytelling in general, especially with that epic recap that Airhammer just came up with, you can feel the influences of its comic origins in the fact that the way they treat characters as disposable. Like, we need to get rid of this character so we can make a big bang, and oh my god, it's the death of Optimus Prime, people are going to come in and see that, and then when people get upset about it, and after it's been a while, they bring him back. Oh my god, Optimus Prime's back, so celebrate, you know. You can feel, that's a very comic book thing to do. I know the other influence, a big thing that Transformers has inspired, or at least that we have seen a lot of links to, because we're all big fans of Steven Universe, is that link.
I recently did a crossover with the Fan Holes podcast, and during that, I made a reference to Steven Universe, which I guess I can bring up again here. In the recent Michael Bay film, we have a group of characters called the Infernocons, who are supposed to be a combiner. In toy form, they're supposed to be much like the Terracons from G1, but with a new central core character called Skulk. However, in the movie, instead of showing these 5 completely separate characters, they just decided to show Skulk like 7 times and have him combine into a larger version of himself, which made me think of the Crystal Gems, or to be more specific, the group of rubies that we see in Steven Universe that just combine into a larger ruby.
I think Transformers is influential on the franchise level. I said earlier, at the very beginning of this, that it's a concept-driven show, and I think the concept has really come around and become a cultural icon. We've seen it referenced in all sorts of things, like The Simpsons have done a spoof, and you've seen all sorts of little jokey references to it all over the place. Anytime you see a transforming robot that has a personality, that's a reference to Transformers.
Yeah. What I was going to go into with the Steven Universe thing in specific, that there's a lot of influences and things there, but that earlier you were mentioning the intros.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about intros, and I'm like, oh man, I have to write down a note. That's for later. That's where I wrote this down. The intros between the two shows, the original intro for the first 2 seasons, Airhammer made a comment really early, and we were watching Steven Universe about like, he's like, the intro, like, what's up with the intro? It just tells what the show is. It's like, they're the crystal gems and they're saves the day. It doesn't really say much about it, but like, much more about it past that. I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right, that's the truth. But, and this show does exactly the same thing. They're fucking robots in disguise.
Pretty much.
They're more than meets the eyes. It's just another parallel I made. Very similar kind of intro ideas.
There's also 2 very, very similar intros that follow one another.
Yeah. I had a whole bunch of comparisons written down. Both the Gems and the Transformers are alien races that come to Earth in need of resources. Both are split into multiple factions, with one protecting Earth and its inhabitants, even if it's not in their race's best interests, while the other one tries to exploit humankind. Both races can have multiple people combine or fuse together to become a new personality.
What I'm hearing here is Deus, a year ago, when Mojo was only a Steven Universe fan and Airhammer was only a Transformers fan, Deus was right.
Yep, as we brought us together.
A few different shows, of course, have been influenced in their creation. 2 in particular that stood out to me are them being dinosaurs. This was a half 3D cartoon that came out in the summer of 2000. It only had 26 episodes. It followed the events of the Dino Knights, transforming dinosaurs from the prehistoric age that were going on against an evil force called the Dragosaurs. They defeated them. They basically laid alongside the extinct for the 65 million years until the Dragosaurs returned and then decided to reawaken in a museum only to fight them again. And it's kind of interesting. The animation is horrible from today's standards, on par with some of the other attempted 3D shows of the time. And it's very colorful. The Dino Knights are very bright and neon, and they're basically skeletons with metallic or transparent armor. It's kind of weird. The other show, which I actually know nothing about yet because it's part of our upcoming playlist for the podcast, is a show called Turning Mechard.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it
literally did not even know it was on our list.
I've only recently added it. It came out in Japan 2 years ago, and it's only just now starting to air in North America with an English dub. The way I can see it so far is that it combines Transformers and Yu-Gi-Oh! The concept being that there's this human character named Jason that finds a character called a Mechanimal. They're from an alternate world called Triforce. Yeah, I know, lawsuits up the ass coming. But there is something involved in the show where he uses cards, and these are various transforming aliens that take the form of vehicles, robots, and animals. So it's going to be interesting when we get to it.
Huh.
But it's on TV now, if you can find it on your particular cartoon station.
Huh. Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's on the list. I'm intrigued. So, final thoughts?
I think so, yeah.
4 hours later? Final thoughts?
4 hours later.
This
is going to be one of our largest podcasts ever.
Like, even after the butchering, the editing, the chipmunkifying is going to be a long episode.
I hope there's a lot of chipmunkifying.
Yeah.
Transformers is a juggernaut, and we could go on it for days, but we have to try and compress it into what you're hearing now. And if you've managed to reach the end, I commend you. And I highly recommend Transformers as a whole. The original 1986 movie, I feel, is a must-watch. If you've been into the toys, but you've gotten out of them over the years, maybe check them out again. They're doing great things these days.
It's a show that shows its age. I think it's an amazing show for fans of the franchise. If you got into a more recent show, or you just became recently aware of it, or aware of it again because of the live-action films, you definitely could give this show a visit. I don't know that you'd want to watch the entire run, but it's a fun show, and it's way, way better than a 33-year-old show would imply. I think if you're curious, watch a few episodes. Just sit down, give a few episodes, keep in mind the time frame that it came from, and it'll probably entertain in some way or another.
Yeah, so my final thoughts are, they're kind of a mixed bag. I don't want to give the impression that I didn't enjoy the show, because I did. I liked it. I had fun. I'm glad I watched it. But at the same time, I don't think Transformers is never going to be my really big thing that I love. But yeah, I am really glad that I watched the show, and it's a piece of culture that I've experienced now that I'm more knowledgeable about. And that's one thing I really like about watching shows and watching things that I haven't seen before, is that now I have experienced and consumed a new part of culture that I hadn't before. And I'm glad for that. But yeah, it's a good show. It's dated, it shows its age, but it's not necessarily in a horrible, shitty way. I really liked it. I really enjoyed watching it. And I might go back and watch a sprinkling of episodes I skipped before. And there's a few episodes for sure, like Grimlock's New Brain, that I might add to my master list of just randomized cartoon episodes that I watch. Because I have like a list of just episodes from all kinds of different shows that were put on random at time to time. There might be a few episodes that make that list. Yeah, I'm glad I watched it. It was an experience. Recording this podcast for this was an experience. Holy shit. But yeah, I guess that sums it up. What do you want to go out on, guys?
I got something. I got it. Whatever you do, if you have a soul, do not look up Transformers Kiss Players.
Okay.
Boobies.
And that can be your mystery.
Shots.